April 8, 2023, Cedar Falls, Ohio, United States. The courtroom was dead silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of people waiting for something to happen. No. This was different. This was the silence of 40 people holding their breath at the exact same moment. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. The kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. And in the middle of it all sat a 17-year-old boy named Caleb Weston. Now, if you had seen Caleb 6 months earlier, you would have understood why half this town refused to believe he was capable of what he'd been accused of. This kid looked like he'd been manufactured in a lab somewhere to be the perfect American teenager. Sandy blonde hair that flopped just right across his forehead. Jaw like he'd been carved out of marble. And those eyes. Ocean blue. The kind of eyes that made middle-aged women say things like, "He's going to break a lot of hearts someday." But here's the thing about Caleb Weston. He wasn't breaking hearts. He was stopping them. On this particular April morning, Caleb sat at the defense table in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hands were folded neatly in front of him. His posture was perfect. And on his face, that same easy smile he'd been wearing his entire life. The smile that had gotten him out of detention. The smile that had charmed teachers into giving him extensions. The smile that made girls blush and boys want to be his friend. He was still smiling because he still believed he was going to walk out of here a free man. He had no idea what was about to happen. Judge Eleanor Vance sat at the bench, and let me tell you something about this woman. 63 years old. Steel gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it probably gave her a headache. 31 years on the bench. She had seen every kind of killer you could imagine. The desperate ones. The angry ones. The broken ones. And yes, the charming ones. Especially the charming ones. She had reviewed the evidence in her chambers the night before. All of it. Including the footage that the jury hadn't seen yet. And now, as she looked at Caleb Weston and his perfect suit and his perfect smile, her expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes did. See, Caleb was used to adults looking at him a certain way. Teachers looked at him with pride. Coaches looked at him with hope. Parents looked at him with approval. Even the cops who arrested him had seemed almost apologetic about it. But Judge Vance? Judge Vance was looking at him like she could see straight through his skin. Like she could see past the charm and the smile and the carefully rehearsed body language. Like she was looking at something cold and crawling underneath all of it. And for just a fraction of a second, so quick you might have missed it if you blinked, Caleb's smile flickered. The prosecution's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, the state would like to submit Exhibit 47 into evidence. A digital recording recovered from a trail camera located approximately 200 yards from the crime scene." Caleb's lawyer objected. Of course he did. That's what lawyers do. But Judge Vance overruled him without even looking in his direction. Her eyes were still fixed on Caleb. A large monitor was wheeled into the courtroom. And that's when something interesting happened. Caleb Weston, for the first time in his entire life, started to sweat. I want to ask you to do 2 quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Let me take you back. Back before the courtroom. Back before the arrest. Back before anyone in Cedar Falls, Ohio had any reason to think that the golden boy in their midst was anything other than exactly what he appeared to be. Cedar Falls. Population just under 9,000. The kind of town where everybody knows everybody and everybody's business is everybody else's entertainment. Friday nights meant high school football under the lights. Saturday mornings meant pancake breakfasts at the VFW Hall. Sunday meant church, and if you didn't go, people noticed. It was late September when this story really begins. The leaves were just starting to turn, those first hints of orange and gold creeping into the edges of the maples. The air had that crisp bite to it, that electricity that comes when summer finally lets go. You could smell wood smoke in the evenings. You could hear marching band practice echoing across the empty cornfields. And everywhere you went, you heard one name. Caleb Weston. Now, Caleb wasn't the quarterback. He wasn't the star running back or the kid throwing 70-yard passes under the Friday night lights. No. Caleb was something more valuable than that. Caleb was the boy everyone trusted. Captain of the debate team. Youth group leader at First Methodist. Volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends. He had a 4.1 GPA and letters of recommendation from teachers who described him as exceptional and mature beyond his years, and a natural leader. He was on track to be valedictorian. He had already been accepted early decision to Duke. His parents, Dr. Richard Weston, a cardiothoracic surgeon, and Patricia Weston, who chaired every charity committee in a 50-mile radius, were pillars of the community. Their house sat on a hill overlooking the town, white columns and black shutters, American flag rippling from a pole in the front yard. Picture perfect. Postcard perfect. The kind of perfect that should have made someone suspicious. But here's the thing about small towns. People see what they want to see. And what they wanted to see in Caleb Weston was hope. Proof that the American dream still worked. Proof that if you raised a kid right, he'd turn out good. So that's what they saw. Nobody saw the monster underneath. Let me paint you a picture. First day of senior year. Caleb walks through the front doors of Cedar Falls High School. The morning sun is streaming through the windows, catching the dust motes floating in the air. The hallway smells like floor wax and cheap body spray and that particular anxiety that comes with being 17. A freshman drops his books. Papers go everywhere, scattering across the linoleum like leaves in a windstorm. The kid's face goes red. A couple of seniors laugh as they walk by. Classic high school cruelty, the kind that happens 1,000 times a day in 1,000 different schools. But Caleb stops. He kneels down and helps the kid pick up every single paper. He asks the kid's name. Marcus. He asks Marcus what classes he's taking. He makes a joke about the cafeteria food. By the time they're done, Marcus is grinning like he just met a celebrity. Caleb claps him on the shoulder. First day's the hardest, he says. It gets easier. Trust me. And Marcus does trust him. Of course he does. Everyone trusts Caleb Weston. Later that day, Caleb charms his way into a deadline extension from Mrs. Patterson, the AP English teacher who hasn't given an extension in 15 years. He does it with self-deprecating humor and just the right amount of vulnerability. He mentions that things have been tough at home lately, without offering specifics. Mrs. Patterson's face softens. Just this once, she says. But it's not just this once. It's never just this once with Caleb. After school, he runs debate practice with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 CEO. He gives constructive feedback that somehow makes people feel good about their mistakes. He remembers everyone's name. He remembers their siblings' names. He remembers what they told him about their weekends 3 weeks ago. He's perfect. Too perfect. And in a town like Cedar Falls, nobody thought to ask the obvious question. What kind of 17-year-old is that good at performing? What kind of teenager never slips up, never loses his temper, never says the wrong thing at the wrong time? What kind of kid is so perfectly, relentlessly charming that adults describe him as mature beyond his years, without ever stopping to wonder what made him that way? I'll tell you what kind. The kind that's been practicing. The kind that figured out early, real early, that if you wear the right mask, you can get away with almost anything. Almost. Because here's the thing about masks. Eventually, they crack. And when Caleb Weston's mask finally cracked, it wouldn't just shatter his life. It would shatter an entire town's faith in everything they thought they knew about the people sleeping next door. Let me tell you how monsters are made. Not the kind in horror movies. Not the ones with fangs and claws and glowing eyes. Those are easy. Those you can see coming from a mile away. No. I'm talking about the real monsters. The ones who sit next to you in church. The ones who shake your hand and look you right in the eye. The ones who make you feel special and seen and understood. Those monsters? They're built one brick at a time. And Caleb Weston's first brick was laid before he could even walk. The Weston house sat at the top of Maple Ridge Drive like a crown on a king's head. 4,000 square feet. 6 bedrooms. A 3-car garage that housed a Mercedes, a BMW, and a vintage Corvette that Dr. Richard Weston only drove on sunny Sundays. From the outside, it looked like something from a magazine. From the inside, it was a museum. Everything had its place. The furniture was expensive and uncomfortable. The art on the walls was chosen by a decorator, not by anyone who actually lived there. The kitchen was spotless because nobody really cooked in it. Meals came from caterers or restaurants or the housekeeper who came 3 times a week. And the silence. God, the silence. Dr. Richard Weston was a cardiothoracic surgeon at Cleveland General, which meant he left before dawn and came home after dark. When he was home, he was tired. When he was tired, he was irritable. His love language was money. A new bike when Caleb turned 7. A gaming system when he turned 10. A car, a brand new Jeep Wrangler, when he turned 16. Gifts, not presents. Things, not time. Patricia Weston tried to fill the gap. But Patricia had her own demons. An anxiety disorder she managed with wine and Xanax, a desperate need to be seen as perfect, and a mother who had told her every single day of her childhood that she wasn't good enough. So Patricia poured everything into Caleb. He was her proof. Her evidence. Her walking, talking demonstration that she had done something right. When Caleb brought home straight A's, Patricia posted about it on Facebook. When Caleb made varsity debate as a freshman, Patricia called everyone she knew. When Caleb did anything even remotely impressive, Patricia made sure the whole world heard about it. But here's the thing about that kind of attention. It teaches a kid something dangerous. It teaches him that love is a performance. It teaches him that affection is earned through achievement. It teaches him that who he really is doesn't matter, only who he appears to be. And Caleb? Caleb was a very fast learner. Let me take you back to the summer before 5th grade. The Westons had a neighbor named Mrs. Callahan. Sweet woman. 70s. Lived alone. She had a cat named Butterscotch, a fat orange tabby who liked to sun himself on the Callahan's front porch. One day, Butterscotch disappeared. Mrs. Callahan was devastated. She put up flyers. She walked the neighborhood calling his name until her voice went hoarse. She even called the local radio station and asked them to make an announcement. Butterscotch never came home. 3 weeks later, a maintenance worker found the cat's remains in a drainage ditch about a half-mile from Maple Ridge Drive. Animal control said it was probably a coyote. But here's what nobody knew. The night before Butterscotch disappeared, 10-year-old Caleb Weston had been outside past his bedtime. His mother had yelled at him earlier that evening, really yelled, which was rare for Patricia. He'd been sulking ever since. Angry in that quiet, simmering way that kids get when they don't have the words for what they're feeling. He saw the cat on Mrs. Callahan's porch, and something in him wanted to hurt it. Not because the cat had done anything wrong. Not because Caleb was defending himself or protecting something. Just because hurting it felt like a way to release the pressure building inside his chest. So he did. And here's the part that should really make your skin crawl. After it was over, Caleb didn't feel guilty. He felt calm. He felt powerful. He felt like he'd discovered a secret that nobody else knew. The next morning, he walked over to Mrs. Callahan's house. He hugged her. He told her how sorry he was about Butterscotch. He even made her a card with crayons and construction paper. She kept that card on her refrigerator for years. Now, I want to be clear about something. Lots of kids have rough childhoods. Lots of kids have absent fathers and anxious mothers and houses that feel more like showrooms than homes. Most of those kids don't grow up to be killers. But some do. And the difference isn't always easy to spot. Looking back, there were signs. Little moments that should have raised red flags. But the thing about Caleb was that he was so good at being charming that people explained away everything. 7th grade. A classmate named Derek Morrison accused Caleb of stealing money from his locker. $20. Derek's lunch money for the month. Derek told the principal. The principal called Caleb in. Caleb didn't get defensive. He didn't get angry. He got sad. His eyes welled up with tears. His voice cracked just slightly. He explained that Derek had been bullying him for weeks, calling him names, shoving him in the hallways. He said he thought maybe Derek was making up the stealing story to get him in trouble. The principal believed Caleb. Of course he did. Derek Morrison got 3 days of detention for filing a false report. He transferred schools the following year. Caleb kept the $20. Freshman year. A girl named Brittany Summers told her friends that Caleb had said something creepy to her at a party. Something about how he could tell she was the kind of girl who kept secrets. When the rumor got back to Caleb, he didn't confront Brittany. He charmed her best friend instead. Within a week, Brittany was the one being talked about. Stories circulated that she was a liar, that she was jealous, that she'd made the whole thing up because Caleb had rejected her. Brittany never spoke about it again. Sophomore year. A substitute teacher noticed something off about Caleb. She couldn't explain it exactly. Just something behind his eyes when he thought no one was watching. A coldness. A flatness. She mentioned it to the guidance counselor. The guidance counselor laughed it off. Caleb Weston. That kid's the best thing about this school. You must have caught him on an off day. The substitute never brought it up again. You see what was happening here? Every time someone got close to the truth, Caleb adapted. He learned which facial expressions generated sympathy. He learned which tone of voice made adults trust him. He learned that vulnerability, even fake vulnerability, was the ultimate weapon. By the time he was 17, Caleb Weston wasn't just wearing a mask. He was the mask. The real Caleb, the cold, calculating thing that lived underneath, had been buried so deep that sometimes even he forgot it was there. Until someone reminded him. Until someone made him feel something he hadn't felt since he was a child. Until a 15-year-old girl named Mia Chen looked at him across a crowded room and saw exactly what he was. But we'll get to Mia. First, you need to understand one more thing about Caleb. The thing that made him different from every other narcissist, every other manipulator, every other kid with a dark side and a pretty face. Caleb Weston wasn't just good at fooling people. He enjoyed it. Every lie he told, every person he manipulated, every time he got away with something, it gave him a rush. A high. Like a gambler hitting a jackpot or an addict getting their fix. The game was the point. Winning was the drug. And for 17 years, Caleb had never lost. He had never been caught. He had never faced a consequence he couldn't charm his way out of. He had started to believe, truly believe, deep in his bones, that he was untouchable, special, above the rules that governed ordinary people. And that belief, that arrogance, that was the thing that would destroy him. Because the universe has a way of humbling people who think they're gods. And Caleb's humbling was coming. It was already in motion. He just didn't know it yet. Now let me tell you about the girl who saw through him. Because in a town full of people who bought Caleb Weston's act without question, there was one person who didn't clap at his performance. One person who looked at that perfect smile and felt something cold run down her spine. Her name was Mia Chen, and she was 15 years old. Mia wasn't the kind of girl who stood out in a crowd. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She didn't post constantly on social media or chase popularity or worry about who was dating who. In the high school ecosystem of Cedar Falls, she was practically invisible. And that was exactly how she liked it. She had transferred to Cedar Falls at the start of freshman year when her father, a software engineer, took a job at a tech company in nearby Columbus. Her mother, Lily, worked part-time at the local library. They lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on the east side of town, the side without the big lawns and the fancy cars. The Chens weren't poor. But they weren't Westons either. Mia's bedroom was small but warm. Posters of classical composers on the walls, Beethoven, Debussy, Yo-Yo Ma. A twin bed with a quilt her grandmother had made before she passed. A desk cluttered with sheet music and homework, and a journal she wrote in every night before bed. And in the corner, in a place of honor, her violin. God, she loved that violin. It was a student model, nothing fancy, but she'd been playing since she was 6 years old. When she played, everything else disappeared. The anxiety about fitting in at a new school. The pressure of grades and college applications still years away. The loneliness that came with being the quiet kid in a town where everyone had known each other since kindergarten. Music was her escape. Music was her voice. She had this dream, and she didn't tell many people about it because it felt too precious to share, of becoming a veterinarian who played in a community orchestra on weekends. Animals and music. The two things that made sense to her when nothing else did. Her violin teacher, Mrs. Yamamoto, told her she had real talent. "You play with feeling," Mrs. Yamamoto said once. "That's something you can't teach." Mia held on to that compliment like a treasure. Let me paint you a picture of who Mia Chen was as a person. Because when someone becomes a victim, there's a danger that they stop being a person in the story. They become a statistic, a headline, a name on a memorial. But Mia was so much more than what happened to her. She was the kind of kid who noticed when someone was having a bad day. Freshman year, there was a girl in her biology class named Taylor who always sat alone. Taylor was overweight, awkward, the kind of kid who got picked last for everything. Most people ignored her. Some people were cruel. Mia sat next to her. Not in a big performative way. Not for attention or praise. She just slid into the seat beside Taylor one day and started talking about the assignment. The next day, she did it again. And the day after that. By the end of the semester, Taylor had a friend. That was Mia. She was the kid who stopped to help a stray dog find its way home. She was the kid who left encouraging notes in library books for strangers to find. She was the kid who once spent her entire allowance on flowers for her mom, not for Mother's Day or a birthday, just because her mom seemed sad. Quiet kindness. The kind that doesn't make the highlight reel but makes the world a little more bearable for everyone in it. Now here's the thing about Mia that made her different from almost everyone else in Cedar Falls. She didn't trust easy. Part of it was being new to town. When you're the outsider, you learn to watch before you engage. You learn to read people carefully because you don't have years of history to rely on. But part of it was just who she was. Mia had this radar for fakeness. She could spot a phony from across the room. The kids who were only nice when they wanted something. The teachers who played favorites. The parents who smiled in public but screamed at their kids in private. She didn't judge them exactly. She just kept her distance. And from the very first time she saw Caleb Weston, every alarm in her body went off. It was about 3 weeks into the school year. Mia was in the library during lunch, practicing fingering positions on a tabletop while she read a biography of Itzhak Perlman. She liked the library. It was quiet. The librarian, Mrs. Foster, let her eat her sandwich in the back corner as long as she cleaned up after herself. Caleb walked in with 2 of his friends. Now, Caleb didn't hang out in the library. The library was for nerds and loners and kids who didn't have anywhere else to go. Caleb held court in the cafeteria, in the courtyard, in the spaces where people could see him being magnificent. But on this particular day, he needed a book for a history project. Mia watched him over the top of her biography. She watched him charm Mrs. Foster, complimenting her glasses, asking about her weekend, making her laugh in that way that librarians weren't supposed to laugh in libraries. She watched him walk through the stacks, perfectly aware of his own presence, like an actor who knew exactly where the cameras were. She watched his friends trail behind him like satellites orbiting a planet. And then Caleb's eyes found hers. He smiled. That smile. The one that worked on everyone. The one that made girls blush and boys feel chosen and adults trust him with their car keys and their wallets and their daughters. Mia didn't smile back. She just looked at him. And something flickered across Caleb's face. Just for a second. A micro-expression that most people would have missed entirely. Confusion. And underneath that, irritation. Why wasn't she smiling? Why wasn't she blushing? Why wasn't she responding the way everyone else did? He held eye contact for another moment, then turned away. Mia went back to her book. But her heart was beating fast. Because in that brief moment of eye contact, she had seen something that terrified her. Behind those ocean blue eyes, behind that perfect smile, there was nothing. Not warmth. Not curiosity. Not even meanness, exactly. Just emptiness. Like looking into the eyes of a shark. Mia didn't tell anyone about that moment. What would she even say? Hey, I made eye contact with the most popular guy in school and got a weird vibe? She'd sound crazy. She'd sound jealous. She'd sound like every other girl who couldn't handle the fact that Caleb Weston existed. So she kept it to herself. But she started paying attention. She watched Caleb in the hallways. She watched how he adapted to whoever he was talking to, bro-ish with the athletes, intellectual with the teachers, sweet and almost shy with the girls he was interested in. She noticed how his facial expressions seemed just slightly delayed, like he was choosing them rather than feeling them. She noticed how his eyes never changed, even when his smile did. And she noticed how everyone around him was absolutely oblivious. It scared her. Not because she thought he was going to hurt her specifically, but because she recognized something in him that she'd read about in books and seen in documentaries. The charm that wasn't really charm. The performance that never stopped. The mask that had become more real than the face underneath. Mia Chen was 15 years old, and she had just identified a psychopath. She just didn't know what to do about it. 3 weeks later, everything changed. It was a Saturday night in early October. One of those crisp fall evenings where the air smells like dying leaves and bonfires. A senior named Jake Hollister was throwing a party while his parents were in Michigan for a wedding. Mia hadn't wanted to go. Parties weren't her thing. Too loud. Too crowded. Too many people pretending to be having more fun than they actually were. But her one close friend, a girl named Sophie, had begged her. "Please, Mia. I don't want to go alone. We'll stay for 1 hour, I promise. 1 hour and then we can leave and go get ice cream." So Mia went. The Hollister house was packed. Music thumping from Bluetooth speakers. Red Solo cups everywhere. The smell of cheap beer and too much cologne. Kids from school squeezed into every room, laughing too loud, taking selfies, pretending they were in a movie. Mia stuck close to Sophie, counting down the minutes until they could escape. And then she saw him. Caleb Weston. Standing in the corner of the living room with a cup in his hand, surrounded by his usual circle of admirers. His eyes found hers across the room. And this time, he didn't just smile. He walked toward her. Caleb moved through that crowded living room like a shark through shallow water. Smooth. Confident. Inevitable. People parted for him without even realizing they were doing it. That was the effect Caleb Weston had. He didn't push through crowds. Crowds opened up for him. Like he was magnetic. Like he was royalty. Mia watched him approach and felt her stomach tighten. Sophie was saying something beside her, something about a guy from chemistry class, but Mia couldn't hear her anymore. All she could hear was her own heartbeat and the bass thumping from the speakers and the sound of Caleb's footsteps getting closer. And then he was there. Standing right in front of her. Smiling that smile. "Hey," he said. "I don't think we've officially met. I'm Caleb." His voice was warm. Friendly. Perfectly calibrated. Mia didn't respond right away. She was too busy studying him up close. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way he stood just slightly too close, invading her space in a way that felt intentional. "I know who you are," she finally said. Her voice came out flat. Unimpressed. Something flickered behind Caleb's eyes. "Yeah." He laughed. A practiced, easy laugh. "All good things, I hope." "I didn't say that." Sophie made a small choking sound beside her. Mia could practically feel her friend's panic radiating off her in waves. Nobody talked to Caleb Weston like that. Nobody. But Mia couldn't help it. Something about this boy made her want to poke at the mask. To see what was underneath. Caleb's smile didn't waver, but it changed somehow. Became sharper. More focused. "You're funny," he said. "I like that. Most people around here are so predictable. I should get back to my friend." Mia turned to walk away. And that's when Caleb did something that would haunt her for the next 3 weeks. He reached out and touched her arm. Not aggressively. Not forcefully. Just a light touch, barely more than a brush of fingertips against her sleeve. But it stopped her cold. "Hey," he said softly. "I didn't mean to weird you out. I just think you're interesting. Different from other people. That's a compliment, by the way." Mia looked down at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at his face. "Don't touch me," she said quietly. Firmly. She pulled her arm away and walked back to Sophie. Her whole body was trembling. Behind her, she could feel Caleb's eyes following her across the room. She didn't look back. Let me explain something about narcissists. When most people get rejected, they feel hurt, embarrassed, maybe a little sad. They might go home and eat ice cream and watch a sad movie and eventually move on with their lives. But narcissists? Narcissists don't experience rejection the way normal people do. To a narcissist, rejection isn't just disappointing. It's an attack. It's a wound. It's a declaration of war. See, in Caleb's mind, he was special, superior, chosen. The rules that applied to ordinary people didn't apply to him. And one of those rules, one of the fundamental laws of his universe, was that people didn't say no to Caleb Weston. People said yes. People said thank you. People said whatever you want. That was how the world worked. And this girl, this quiet, plain, nobody girl, had just looked him in the eye and told him not to touch her. In front of people. At a party. Like he was some creep. Like he was ordinary. Caleb drove home that night with his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. His jaw was clenched. His mind was racing. Who did she think she was? Did she have any idea who she was dealing with? Did she know what he could do to her reputation with a single well-placed rumor? He could destroy her. He could make her a ghost. He could... And then, slowly, his grip on the steering wheel relaxed. A different kind of thought entered his mind. Not destruction. Something else. Something that felt almost like curiosity. She had seen through him. He could tell. In that moment when their eyes met, she had looked at him like she could see behind the mask. Like she knew something was wrong with him. And instead of making him angry, that realization made him interested. Because everyone else was so easy. Everyone else was so boring. But this girl might actually be a challenge. The obsession started small. That's how these things always work. Nobody wakes up one day as a stalker. It builds. It escalates. It grows like a vine, one tendril at a time, until it's wrapped around everything. Monday morning after the party, Caleb found himself looking for Mia in the hallways. Not approaching her. Not even walking near her. Just watching. He noticed she always arrived at school exactly 7 minutes before the first bell. She came in through the side entrance near the music wing. She went to her locker, number 247, lower level, and retrieved her books for the first 3 periods. He noticed she ate lunch in the library most days, in a back corner where the overhead light flickered slightly. She always brought food from home. A sandwich. An apple. Sometimes cookies that looked homemade. He noticed she stayed after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays for violin lessons. Mrs. Yamamoto's classroom, room 115. The lessons lasted exactly 1 hour. He noticed she walked home unless it was raining. When it rained, her mother picked her up in a gray Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. He noticed everything, and he wrote it all down. Caleb had kept journals since middle school. Not the kind of journals that normal teenagers keep, rambling entries about crushes and homework and teenage drama. No. Caleb's journals were different. They were records, observations, studies. He had journals full of notes about the people around him, their habits, their weaknesses, their pressure points. He wrote about which lies worked on which teachers. He wrote about which emotional performances generated the most sympathy. He wrote about the looks on people's faces when he manipulated them successfully. It was research, practice, a predator learning his craft. And now, in late September of his senior year, Caleb started a new section in his current journal. He titled it simply, M. The first entry was clinical. M. Chen. Sophomore. 15 years old. Transferred from out of state last year. Plays violin. Quiet. Keeps to herself. Doesn't respond to normal social cues. Resistant to charm. Possibly sees through facade. Interesting. The second entry, 2 days later, was more detailed. M. Walks the same route home every day. Maple Street to Oak Avenue to Cherry Lane. Approximately 1.2 miles. Takes her about 25 minutes. She doesn't wear earbuds when she walks. She looks around. Aware of surroundings. Smart. Makes it more challenging. By the third entry, something had shifted. Can't stop thinking about M. The way she looked at me at the party. The way she said, "Don't touch me." Like I was nothing. Like I was nobody. Nobody talks to me that way. Nobody sees me the way she does. I need to understand her. I need to know why she's different. I need to know what makes her think she's better than me. I need to teach her that she's not. Meanwhile, Mia felt something wrong. She couldn't explain it exactly. Couldn't point to any specific evidence. But starting the week after the party, she began to feel watched. It started as a prickle on the back of her neck during class. She'd turn around and see nothing unusual. Just rows of students taking notes or staring at their phones or doodling in their notebooks. But the feeling persisted. She mentioned it to Sophie once, casually, trying to keep her voice light. "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you?" Sophie laughed. "You mean like a ghost? Are you haunted?" "No, I mean, like at school. In the hallways." Sophie shrugged. "Probably just paranoia. New school jitters, you know? You've only been here a year." Mia nodded and let it go. But she didn't feel better. The feeling got stronger. One day, walking home from school, she could have sworn she saw a familiar Jeep Wrangler turn down a side street just as she looked up. Another day, she found a note in her locker. Just 4 words, typed on plain white paper. "I see you, MIA." No signature. No explanation. Her hands trembled as she read it. She told herself it was a prank. Some stupid joke from a bored senior. It didn't mean anything. She threw the note away. But that night, for the first time in her life, Mia Chen locked her bedroom door before she went to sleep. Caleb, meanwhile, was having the time of his life. This was better than anything he'd experienced before. Better than cheating on tests without getting caught. Better than manipulating teachers into giving him extensions. Better than watching his lies work perfectly on unsuspecting targets. This was a hunt. A real hunt. And Mia was the prey. He started planning. Not just watching anymore. Not just observing. He began scouting locations. There was an abandoned grain silo about 12 miles outside of town. He'd driven past it 100 times without really noticing it. But one day, on a whim, he pulled off the road and walked around the property. It was perfect. Isolated. Forgotten. Surrounded by empty fields and accessed by a dirt road that nobody used anymore. He took pictures with his phone. He measured distances. He timed the drive from school, from Mia's house, from his own house. He calculated everything. And in his journal, he wrote the entry that would later make the jury's blood run cold. October 10th. 4 days until everything changes. She thinks she can see through me. She thinks she knows what I am. I'm going to show her exactly what I am. And then she'll understand that nobody rejects Caleb Weston and gets away with it. The silo is ready. I'm ready. Now I just need to wait for the perfect moment. Mia had no idea. She went to school. She practiced her violin. She ate dinner with her parents and helped her mother with the dishes and did her homework and went to sleep. She had no idea that someone was circling her life like a vulture. She had no idea that October 14th was already marked on a calendar. She had no idea that she had less than a week left. October 14th. I need you to remember that date. Write it down if you have to. Burn it into your memory. Because October 14th was the day that everything in Cedar Falls changed forever. It was a Tuesday. The kind of ordinary Tuesday that doesn't feel special at all. The kind you forget about 5 minutes after it's over. Mia Chen woke up that morning at 6:45, just like always. She showered, brushed her teeth, pulled her dark hair back into a simple ponytail. She put on jeans and a green sweater her grandmother had given her for her birthday. She ate breakfast with her parents, scrambled eggs and toast, the same thing her mom made every Tuesday. Her dad was reading something on his phone. Her mom was talking about a book donation the library had just received. Normal. Completely normal. Mia grabbed her backpack, kissed her mom on the cheek, and headed out the door. "Have a good day, sweetheart," her mother called after her. "You too," Mia said. Those were the last words Lily Chen would ever hear from her daughter. The school day passed without incident. Mia went to her classes. She took notes in biology. She suffered through a pop quiz in algebra that she was pretty sure she bombed. She ate lunch in the library, same as always, reading a novel while she picked at a peanut butter sandwich. She didn't notice Caleb watching her from across the cafeteria during third period. She didn't notice him following her at a distance in the hallways between classes. She didn't notice him sitting in his Jeep in the parking lot during her violin lesson, waiting, watching the clock on his dashboard. Mia was thinking about other things. She was thinking about the Tchaikovsky piece she'd been working on for weeks. Mrs. Yamamoto had told her she was almost ready to perform it. There was a winter recital coming up in December, and Mia had been chosen to play a solo. A solo. Her first ever. She couldn't stop smiling about it. The lesson went well that day. Mrs. Yamamoto clapped her hands together at one point and said, "Yes, Mia, yes. That's exactly the feeling I've been looking for." Mia floated out of the music room at 4:15 p.m. The sun was already starting to set. October in Ohio meant shorter days, longer shadows. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air had that clean, cold bite that made your lungs feel sharp. Mia started walking home. Same route as always. Maple Street to Oak Avenue to Cherry Lane. She didn't put in her earbuds. She never did when she walked. She liked to hear the world around her, the crunch of leaves under her feet, the distant barking of dogs, the wind rustling through the trees. She liked to be aware of her surroundings. Smart girl. But some dangers you can't hear coming. Caleb had parked his Jeep on a side street about 3 blocks from the school. He'd thought about this moment for days. Rehearsed it in his mind. Planned every detail with the precision of a surgeon, which made sense, given who his father was. He knew exactly when Mia's lesson ended. He knew exactly which route she would take. He knew exactly where the street got quiet, where the houses thinned out, where the sidewalk disappeared and became just a dirt path alongside an empty field. That was where he would do it. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked good. Composed. Just a normal teenager out for a drive. He started the engine. Mia was about halfway home when she felt it again. That prickle on the back of her neck. That feeling of being watched. She stopped walking and turned around. Nothing. Just the empty street behind her. A few fallen leaves skittering across the pavement. A porch light flickering on at a house about 50 yards back. She shook her head. "You're being paranoid," she told herself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." She kept walking. But she walked a little faster now. The Jeep appeared about a block behind her. Mia heard it before she saw it. The low rumble of an engine. The crunch of tires on asphalt. She glanced over her shoulder. A Jeep Wrangler. Dark blue. Her heart stuttered. No. It couldn't be. There were probably dozens of dark blue Jeeps in Cedar Falls. She was being ridiculous. She was being. The Jeep slowed down. And then it pulled up alongside her. The window rolled down. And there he was. Caleb Weston. Smiling that smile. "Hey, Mia. Need a ride?" Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run. But she didn't. Because running would be crazy. Running would be dramatic. Running would mean she was the paranoid freak who couldn't handle a simple conversation with a popular senior. So instead, she just shook her head. "No thanks. I'm almost home." "Come on," Caleb said. His voice was friendly, easy, like they were old friends. "It's getting dark and cold. Let me give you a lift." "I'm fine. Mia." He said her name slowly, like he was tasting it. "I just want to apologize for the party. I think I came on too strong, and I've felt bad about it ever since. Let me make it up to you. Just a ride home. That's all." She looked at him. Those blue eyes. That perfect face. And underneath it all, that emptiness she had seen from the very beginning. "I said no." She started walking faster. The Jeep rolled forward, keeping pace with her. "Mia, wait. Leave me alone." Her voice cracked. Loud. Desperate. Echoing across the empty street. A dog started barking somewhere nearby. Caleb's expression changed. The smile disappeared. And for just a second, Mia saw what was underneath. Cold. Flat. Hungry. Then the Jeep accelerated and swerved in front of her, blocking the sidewalk. The door flew open. And everything after that happened so fast. I'm not going to describe what happened next in graphic detail. You don't need that. Mia doesn't deserve that. What I will tell you is this. She fought. God, she fought. She scratched and kicked and screamed until her voice gave out. She bit Caleb's hand so hard she drew blood. She left marks on him that would later become evidence. But Caleb was bigger, stronger, and he had planned this moment for weeks. In the end, he was able to force her into the Jeep. And then he drove. 12 miles outside of town. To an abandoned grain silo that nobody had visited in years. At 6:47 p.m., Lily Chen called her daughter's phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. "Hey, sweetheart, dinner's almost ready. Where are you? Call me back." At 7:15 p.m., she called again. Voicemail. At 7:30 p.m., David Chen got in the car and drove Mia's usual route home. He found her backpack on the side of the road. Her violin case was lying in the grass a few feet away. One of her shoes, a white sneaker with a small tear on the left toe, was sitting in the middle of the sidewalk. David Chen started screaming his daughter's name. He screamed until his voice gave out. He screamed until the neighbors came out of their houses. He screamed until someone called 911. At 8:15 p.m., while the Chen family was dissolving into panic and the Cedar Falls Police Department was launching a search, Caleb Weston was sitting at his family's dinner table. Pot roast. Mashed potatoes. Steamed green beans. His mother was talking about a fundraiser she was planning. His father was checking emails on his phone between bites. Caleb ate his dinner calmly. He complimented his mother on the pot roast. He asked his father about a surgery he'd performed that morning. He was charming. Attentive. Perfect. Just like always. After dinner, he excused himself to do homework. He went up to his room, closed the door, and sat on his bed in the darkness. And he smiled. Not the smile he wore for other people. Not the performance. Not the mask. This was a different smile. The smile of a predator who had finally caught his prey. He had done it. He had actually done it. And nobody would ever know. Meanwhile, in an abandoned silo 12 miles outside of town, the October wind howled through the broken slats in the walls. It was cold. So cold. And in the darkness, where nobody could hear, where nobody would think to look, a 15-year-old girl who loved music and animals and leaving kind notes in library books was no longer breathing. The world had lost something precious. And it didn't even know it yet. By midnight, the whole town knew. That's how small towns work. News travels fast. Bad news travels faster. And the worst news of all, a missing child, spreads like wildfire through dry brush. Phone trees lit up. Text messages pinged across the county. Facebook posts were shared hundreds of times within hours. Missing. Mia Chen, 15 years old. Last seen walking home from Cedar Falls High School. Black hair, brown eyes, approximately 5 feet 4 inches, wearing jeans and a green sweater. If you have any information, please contact the Cedar Falls Police Department immediately. By dawn, there were over 200 people gathered in the parking lot of the First Methodist Church. Farmers, teachers, shop owners, stay-at-home moms, teenagers who had barely spoken to Mia but wanted to help anyway. They came with flashlights and water bottles and determination. They came because that's what you do in a town like Cedar Falls. When one family hurts, everyone hurts. When one child goes missing, every child is missing. Deputy Chief Warren Briggs stood on the back of a pickup truck and divided the volunteers into search groups. Grid by grid, they would cover every inch of the town and the surrounding countryside. "We're going to find her," he said into a bullhorn. His voice was steady, but his eyes told a different story. 22 years on the force, and he'd never had a case like this. "We're going to bring Mia home." The crowd murmured in agreement. And somewhere in the middle of that crowd, wearing a Cedar Falls debate team sweatshirt and holding a flashlight, stood Caleb Weston. He had arrived early. Of course he had. He had made sure to position himself near the front, where people could see him. He had hugged Mrs. Patterson, his AP English teacher, and told her how scared he was for Mia. He had shaken hands with Deputy Chief Briggs and offered to lead one of the search parties. "She's just a kid," Caleb said, his voice cracking just slightly. Just enough to sound emotional without being theatrical. "We have to find her." Briggs had clapped him on the shoulder. "Good man, Caleb. This town needs more young people like you." Caleb nodded solemnly. Inside, he was floating. This was even better than he had imagined. Not just getting away with it, but being praised while he got away with it. Being seen as a hero while the girl he had killed lay cold and forgotten in a place nobody would ever think to look. It was perfect. He was perfect. The search went on for days. Volunteers combed through the woods behind the high school. They checked every abandoned building within a 5-mile radius of where Mia's backpack had been found. They searched drainage ditches and empty lots and the banks of the creek that ran through the center of town. Nothing. The police brought in dogs. The dogs picked up Mia's scent on the sidewalk where she'd been taken. They followed it to the street where Caleb's Jeep had been parked. And then, nothing. The trail ended. Because you can't track a scent inside a car. The FBI sent a field agent to assist with the investigation. Her name was Special Agent Diane Kowalski, and she had worked missing persons cases for 15 years. She interviewed Mia's parents, her teachers, her friends. She interviewed Caleb. He sat across from her in the Cedar Falls Police Department, hands folded on the table, eyes wide with concern. "I didn't really know Mia," he said. "We'd talked maybe once or twice. She seemed nice. Quiet, you know, kept to herself. Did you see her on October 14th? "I saw her in the hallway between classes. Just in passing. I think I waved, but I'm not sure she saw me." "Where were you between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. that evening?" Caleb didn't hesitate. "Debate practice until about 4:30. Then I went to the library to study for a history test. I was there until around 6. Then I drove home and had dinner with my parents." Agent Kowalski wrote this down. "Can anyone verify that you were at the library?" "Mrs. Foster was there. She might remember seeing me. I checked out a book on the Roosevelt administration." All of this was true. Caleb had indeed gone to the library after debate practice. He had indeed checked out a book on the Roosevelt administration. He had made sure Mrs. Foster saw him, made sure to have a conversation with her, made sure to establish an alibi. What he didn't mention was that he had left the library through a back entrance at 4:45. That he had been gone for 2 hours. That he had returned at 6:30, sweating slightly, and checked out another book just to create a second timestamp. Agent Kowalski looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. The eyes of someone who had interviewed hundreds of people and learned to read the micro-expressions that most people missed. But Caleb's mask was flawless. He met her gaze with open, earnest concern. "I really hope you find her," he said softly. "Her parents must be going through hell." Agent Kowalski closed her notebook. "Thank you for your time, Caleb. We'll be in touch if we have any more questions." "Of course. Anything I can do to help." That night, there was a candlelight vigil in the town square. Hundreds of people gathered, their faces lit by the flickering glow of small white candles. Pastor Williams from First Methodist led a prayer. Mayor Donaldson gave a speech about community and hope and never giving up. And then Caleb Weston took the microphone. Nobody had asked him to speak. But when he approached the podium, nobody stopped him either. He was Caleb Weston. Of course he should speak. He cleared his throat. I didn't really prepare anything," he began, his voice soft and hesitant. "I'm not even sure what to say. I just keep thinking about Mia. About her family. About how scared they must be." He paused, swallowed hard. "I keep thinking about the last time I saw her in the hallway. She was carrying her violin case. She always carried that thing around like it was precious. Like it was a part of her." A murmur went through the crowd. Several women dabbed at their eyes. "I don't know Mia very well," Caleb continued. "But I know this town. And I know that we don't give up on our own. We're going to find her. We're going to bring her home. And until we do, I'm going to be out there every single day, searching with everyone else." He looked directly at Mia's parents, who were standing in the front row. David Chen's face was gray with exhaustion. Lily Chen looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry this is happening to your family. We're all praying for Mia. We're all hoping for a miracle." He stepped away from the microphone. The crowd applauded. Patricia Weston beamed at her son from the front row. Dr. Richard Weston, for once actually present, nodded with something like pride. And in the back of the crowd, someone watched Caleb with different eyes. Detective Rosa Delgado had been with the Cleveland Police Department for 30 years. She had transferred to Cedar Falls 6 months ago, looking for a quieter life as she approached retirement. A small town. Low crime. The occasional drunk driver or domestic dispute. That was supposed to be her final chapter. Then Mia Chen disappeared. Delgado stood at the back of the vigil crowd, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a cop's instinct honed over 3 decades. She had seen a lot of killers in her time. She had interviewed them, arrested them, testified against them. She had learned to recognize the subtle signs that most people missed. The micro-expressions. The too perfect alibis. The way guilty people sometimes inserted themselves into investigations, unable to stay away from the chaos they'd created. And something about Caleb Weston made her skin crawl. She couldn't explain it exactly. Not yet. He had said all the right things. His alibi checked out on paper. There was no physical evidence connecting him to Mia's disappearance. But something about the way he had looked at Mia's parents. Something about the way his voice had cracked at precisely the right moment. Something about the way he had approached the microphone without being asked, like he couldn't resist being the center of attention. Rosa Delgado had seen this before. Years ago, in Cleveland, there had been a case. A young man, handsome and charming, who had murdered his girlfriend and then organized the search parties looking for her body. He had given tearful interviews. He had comforted the family. He had been magnificent. And underneath it all, he had been a monster. They caught him eventually. A single hair fiber that he'd overlooked. 3 years later, he was serving life without parole. Standing in the candlelight, watching Caleb Weston receive hugs and handshakes from grateful community members, Detective Rosa Delgado made a decision. She was going to look into this kid. Quietly, carefully, but thoroughly. Because her gut was telling her something. And in 30 years on the force, her gut had never been wrong. 12 days. That's how long Mia Chen was missing before they found her. 12 days of searches. 12 days of prayers. 12 days of her parents barely sleeping, barely eating, jumping every time the phone rang. 12 days of hope slowly curdling into dread. And then, on October 26th, a hunter named Earl Hutchins changed everything. Earl was 63 years old. Retired electrician. Widower. The kind of man who didn't talk much but noticed everything. He'd been hunting these woods since he was a boy, walking the same trails his father had walked, and his grandfather before that. On that particular Saturday morning, Earl was tracking a deer. A big buck he'd been after for weeks. 8 points at least, maybe 10. Earl had seen him twice before but never got a clean shot. Today he was determined. He followed the tracks deep into the backcountry, past the old McCready farm, past the abandoned well that everyone said was haunted, past the tree line into the fields that nobody farmed anymore. And that's when he smelled it. If you've never smelled death before, I hope you never do. It's not like anything else. Not like garbage or roadkill or any of the ordinary bad smells that people encounter in everyday life. It's something deeper. Something primal. Something that triggers a warning in the oldest part of your brain. Earl stopped walking. He'd smelled death before. Found a dead deer once, half-eaten by coyotes. Found a dead dog another time, hit by a car and crawled into the woods to die. But this was different. This was worse. He followed the smell across the empty field, his boots crunching through the frost-covered grass. The morning was cold, his breath coming out in white puffs, but he was sweating underneath his hunting jacket. The old grain silo came into view. Earl had passed this place 100 times over the years. Never thought much about it. Just another abandoned structure left over from a farm that had failed decades ago. The walls were rusted, the roof was caving in, and the door hung crooked on broken hinges. The smell was coming from inside. Earl pulled his phone out of his pocket. Checked the signal. 2 bars. Enough. He dialed 911. "This is Earl Hutchins," he said, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "I'm out past the old McCready farm. There's an abandoned silo out here. I think you need to send someone." "What's the nature of the emergency, sir?" Earl closed his eyes. "I think I found that missing girl." The next few hours were controlled chaos. Police cars. Ambulances. Crime scene tape. Deputies setting up a perimeter while forensic technicians in white suits photographed everything. Detective Rosa Delgado was one of the first to arrive. She stood at the entrance of the silo, looking in at what remained of Mia Chen, and felt something harden in her chest. 30 years on the force. Hundreds of crime scenes. But this one hit different. Because Mia was just a kid. 15 years old. A girl who played violin and wanted to be a veterinarian and had her whole life ahead of her. And someone had thrown her away in this place like she was garbage. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, arrived within the hour. She performed a preliminary examination while Delgado watched. "Blunt force trauma to the head," Dr. Okonkwo said quietly. "Multiple strikes. The weapon was heavy, irregular in shape. Maybe a rock or a piece of concrete. Sexual assault?" Dr. Okonkwo shook her head. "I'll know more after the full autopsy, but I don't think so. This wasn't about that." Delgado frowned. Then what was it about? The medical examiner looked up, and something passed between the two women. An understanding that went beyond words. "Control," Dr. Okonkwo said. "Power." This was someone who wanted to prove something. To her or to himself, I don't know. But this wasn't impulsive. Look at the positioning of the body. Look at how clean the scene is. Whoever did this planned it carefully. Delgado nodded slowly. Planned it carefully. That phrase stuck in her mind for the rest of the day. The news hit Cedar Falls like a bomb. Mia Chen was dead. Not missing anymore. Not out there somewhere waiting to be rescued. Dead. Murdered. Left to rot in an abandoned silo like she meant nothing to anyone. The town that had held candlelight vigils and organized search parties and prayed for a miracle now had to face a different reality. One of them was a killer. Because that's the thing about a town like Cedar Falls. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone is connected to everyone. And when a crime like this happens, the killer isn't some faceless stranger from somewhere else. The killer is someone's son, someone's student, someone's neighbor. The killer is someone they've shaken hands with at church. The police didn't release many details. But word got around, the way word always gets around in small towns. There were whispers about the condition of Mia's body. Whispers about how long she'd been dead. Whispers about the location. So isolated, so hidden, that only someone who knew the area well could have found it. Fear settled over Cedar Falls like a fog. Parents started driving their kids to school instead of letting them walk. People locked their doors during the day, something that hadn't happened in decades. Neighbors looked at neighbors with new suspicion. Who did this? Who among us is capable of something like this? The memorial service was held 3 days later. The high school gymnasium was packed. Every seat was taken, and people lined up against the walls, spilling out into the hallway. A photo of Mia sat on an easel at the front of the room, her school picture from last year, smiling that shy smile, her violin case visible at the edge of the frame. Pastor Williams spoke about loss and faith and the mysteries of God's plan. Principal Morrison spoke about Mia's kindness, her talent, her potential. Sophie, Mia's only close friend, tried to speak but broke down sobbing after the first sentence. Mrs. Yamamoto, her violin teacher, finished reading the statement for her. And then, once again, Caleb Weston approached the microphone. This time, he didn't speak right away. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the crowd, his jaw tight with emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking a lot about why things like this happen," he said. "Why someone so young, so innocent, so full of life, could be taken from us in such a brutal way." He paused, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I didn't know Mia as well as I wish I had. But I know she was special. I could see it in the way she carried herself. The way she didn't need anyone's approval. The way she was just herself." Several people in the crowd were crying now. "I don't know who did this," Caleb continued, his voice growing stronger. "But I know that whoever they are, they're going to pay. Justice will come for them. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, the truth always comes out." He looked directly at Mia's parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Chin, I want you to know that Mia mattered. She mattered to this school. She mattered to this community. And she mattered to me." He stepped away from the microphone. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Standing ovation. Caleb walked back to his seat with his head bowed, the picture of humble grief. And at the back of the gymnasium, Detective Rosa Delgado watched him with narrowed eyes. The truth always comes out. He'd actually said that. Standing there at the memorial service for the girl he'd killed, he had looked her parents in the eye and promised that justice would come. Most people in that room heard a passionate young man speaking from the heart. But Delgado heard something else. She heard arrogance. She heard someone who was so confident in his own invincibility that he couldn't resist the thrill of performing at his victim's memorial. She heard a killer taunting everyone in plain sight. And in that moment, Rosa Delgado made herself a promise. She was going to nail this kid. She didn't know how yet. She didn't have evidence yet. But she had 30 years of experience and a gut that was screaming at her. Caleb Weston had killed Mia Chen. And Rosa Delgado was going to prove it. That night, she stayed late at the station. She pulled everything they had on the case. The timeline. The witness statements. The forensic reports. She spread it all out on her desk and stared at it for hours. Something was missing. Something they hadn't found yet. She didn't know what it was. But she could feel it out there, waiting to be discovered. The evidence that would crack this case wide open. She just had to find it. The mask was still holding. But underneath, cracks were forming. And Detective Rosa Delgado? She had spent 30 years staring into the eyes of killers. She knew what she was looking at. Stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. Sometimes justice comes from the strangest places. Not from brilliant detective work. Not from dramatic confessions. Not from eyewitnesses who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Sometimes justice comes from a $49 trail camera bought at a sporting goods store. Sometimes justice comes from a farmer who just wanted to catch poachers. His name was Gerald Whitmore. 71 years old. Third-generation farmer. The kind of man who woke up at 4 a.m. every day of his life because that's what farmers do. He owned about 200 acres of land on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, mostly corn and soybeans, with a stretch of woods along the eastern edge. Gerald had a problem. Poachers. For the past 2 years, someone had been coming onto his property during hunting season and taking deer illegally. Gerald had found the evidence: blood trails, drag marks, tire tracks on the old dirt road that cut through the back of his land. He'd complained to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. No witnesses. No license plates. No way to catch someone who came and went in the middle of the night. So Gerald took matters into his own hands. He bought 6 trail cameras and installed them at strategic points around his property. Motion activated. Infrared for night vision. Weatherproof. They would capture anything that moved within their range. One of those cameras was mounted on a tree about 200 yards from the abandoned grain silo. Gerald hadn't thought much about that particular camera. He'd installed it because poachers sometimes used that area to access the woods. It captured the occasional deer, the occasional coyote, the occasional teenager looking for a place to drink beer away from their parents. He checked the cameras once a week, downloaded the footage onto his computer, and deleted anything that wasn't relevant. On October 28th, 2 days after Mia's body was found, Gerald sat down at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and started reviewing the footage from the past month. He almost didn't see it. He was clicking through quickly, skipping past endless images of empty fields and wandering animals. His finger was on the mouse, ready to click delete, when something made him stop. A car. On the night of October 14th, at 5:47 p.m., a car had driven down the old dirt road toward the silo. Gerald leaned closer to the screen. The footage was grainy. The light was fading, but he could make out the shape of the vehicle clearly enough. A Jeep Wrangler. Dark-colored. Gerald's blood went cold. He kept watching. The Jeep stopped near the silo. The driver's side door opened. A figure got out. The camera was too far away to capture facial features clearly, but Gerald could see enough. A young man. Tall. Athletic build. Moving with purpose. The figure walked around to the passenger side of the Jeep. And then Gerald saw something that made his coffee cup slip from his fingers and shatter on the floor. The figure was dragging something out of the passenger seat. Not something. Someone. A body. Limp. Unmoving. Being pulled by the arms across the grass toward the silo. Gerald watched in horror as the figure disappeared into the structure. The timestamp ticked forward. 5:52 p.m. 5:55 p.m. 6:03 p.m. At 6:07 p.m., the figure emerged. Alone. He walked back to the Jeep, got in, started the engine, and as the vehicle turned around to leave, its headlights swept across the camera's field of view. For exactly 3 frames, less than half a second, the light illuminated the driver's face through the windshield. Gerald paused the footage, enhanced the image as best he could with his basic computer skills, and stared at a face he recognized. A face everyone in Cedar Falls recognized. Caleb Weston. Gerald's hands were shaking as he picked up the phone. He dialed the Cedar Falls Police Department and asked for whoever was handling the Mia Chen case. "This is Gerald Whitmore," he said. "I have a farm out past the old McCready place. I've got trail cameras on my property, and I think I've got footage of what happened to that girl." 45 minutes later, Detective Rosa Delgado was sitting at Gerald's kitchen table, watching the footage on his computer. She watched it once, then again, then a third time, leaning so close to the screen that her nose was almost touching it. "Can I take this?" she asked. Her voice was calm, professional, but her hands were trembling slightly. "Take whatever you need," Gerald said. "Just catch the bastard who did this." Back at the station, Delgado worked through the night. She had the department's tech specialist enhance the footage as much as possible. Frame by frame. Pixel by pixel. The 3 frames where the headlights caught the driver's face were the key. Enhanced and brightened, the image showed a young man with sandy blonde hair. Strong jaw. Distinctive profile. It wasn't perfect. A good defense attorney would argue that it wasn't definitive. But it was enough. It was enough to compare against known photographs. It was enough to establish probable cause. It was enough to get a warrant. Delgado pulled up Caleb Weston's driver's license photo and placed it side by side with the enhanced still from the trail camera. Same hair. Same jaw. Same profile. The same kid who had given those tearful speeches at the vigil and the memorial. The same kid who had promised Mia's parents that justice would come. "Got you," Delgado whispered. But she knew she needed more. The footage placed a Jeep matching Caleb's at the scene. It showed someone matching Caleb's description. But matching wasn't the same as definitely. She needed to build a case that would hold up in court. She started pulling threads. First, the vehicle. Caleb drove a dark blue Jeep Wrangler, registered in his father's name. She obtained the registration records and confirmed the make and model matched the vehicle in the footage. Next, the timeline. She went back to Caleb's original statement. He claimed he was at the library until 6 p.m. But the footage showed the Jeep arriving at the silo at 5:47 p.m. That was a 12-mile drive from the school, which meant Caleb had lied about his whereabouts. She interviewed Mrs. Foster at the library. Yes, she remembered seeing Caleb that afternoon. He'd checked out a book on Roosevelt around 4:30. She remembered because he'd made a joke about it. "Did you see him leave?" Delgado asked. Mrs. Foster frowned. "Now that you mention it, no. I assumed he was still there, studying in the back. But I didn't actually see him again until later. Around 6:30, I think. He checked out another book." Delgado felt the pieces clicking into place. Caleb had established his presence at the library early, then slipped out the back. He'd returned 2 hours later to create a second timestamp. Classic alibi construction. But he'd made a mistake. He'd assumed no one was watching. He'd assumed that stretch of empty farmland was truly empty. He'd assumed wrong. There was more. Delgado obtained a warrant for Caleb's school locker and his bedroom. In the locker, they found nothing unusual. Books, papers, a gym bag. But in the bedroom, hidden in a box under his bed, they found the journals. Pages and pages of observations. Notes on people. Documentation of lies told and manipulation tactics that worked. And a section titled simply, M. The entries made Delgado's skin crawl. M. Walks the same route home every day. She doesn't respond to normal social cues. Resistant to charm. I need to teach her that she's not better than me. The silo is ready. I'm ready. October 14th. 4 days until everything changes. Delgado photographed every page. The final piece came from forensics. When Caleb had dragged Mia from his Jeep, she had scratched him. Mia's mother had mentioned that her daughter always kept her nails neat but slightly long, a requirement for playing violin, something about finger positioning on the strings. The medical examiner had collected samples from under Mia's fingernails. Skin cells. DNA. They ran the sample through the database and got no match. Caleb had never been arrested, never had his DNA collected. But that was about to change. The next morning, Detective Delgado presented her findings to the district attorney. Margaret Holloway had been the DA of Cedar Falls for 12 years. She was tough, methodical, and didn't move forward on cases unless she was confident she could win. She reviewed the trail camera footage. She read the journal entries. She looked at the timeline analysis showing the gap in Caleb's alibi. And then she looked up at Delgado. "This is the Weston kid? The surgeon's son?" "Yes, ma'am." Holloway was quiet for a long moment. "You know what's going to happen when we move on this. The family has money. They'll hire the best defense attorneys in the state. They'll attack every piece of evidence. They'll try to make this about a rush to judgment, small-town bias, A witch hunt against a promising young man. I know. And you're confident in this case? Delgado thought about Mia Chen. 15 years old. Wanted to be a veterinarian. Left to die in an abandoned silo by a boy who thought he was untouchable. I've never been more confident in anything in my career. Holloway nodded slowly. Then let's get a warrant for his arrest. And get a DNA sample while we're at it. She paused. And Rosa? When you arrest him, make sure you do it publicly. This town deserves to see that no one is above the law. Not even the golden boy. Delgado smiled grimly. Yes, ma'am. Caleb Weston had never been nervous a day in his life. Nervous was for ordinary people. Nervous was for people who didn't have everything figured out. Nervous was for people who hadn't spent their entire lives mastering the art of control. Caleb wasn't nervous. He was invincible. So when 2 police officers showed up at his house on a Wednesday evening and asked if he would come down to the station to answer a few more questions, Caleb didn't hesitate. Of course, he said, flashing that smile. Anything to help. His mother looked concerned. His father looked annoyed. He had a surgery scheduled for 6 a.m. the next morning and didn't appreciate the interruption. Should we call a lawyer? Patricia asked, wringing her hands. Mom, relax. Caleb squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. It's just questions. They're probably just following up on stuff I already told them. I'll be back in an hour. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the front door with the officers. Confident. Relaxed. Like he was heading to a friend's house instead of a police interrogation. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The interrogation room at the Cedar Falls Police Department was small and deliberately uncomfortable. Concrete block walls painted a dingy beige. Fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly and cast everything in an unflattering glow. A metal table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs on one side, 1 chair on the other. No windows. No decorations. Nothing to look at except the person sitting across from you. Caleb was escorted into the room by a uniformed officer who gestured toward the single chair. Detective Delgado will be with you shortly. Take your time, Caleb said pleasantly. I'm not going anywhere. He sat down and looked around the room with casual interest. He'd seen interrogation rooms in movies and TV shows, of course. This one was smaller than he expected. Less dramatic. He wasn't worried. He knew how these things worked. The cops would ask their questions, and he would answer them with the same charm and sincerity that had gotten him through every difficult situation in his life. They had nothing on him. They couldn't have anything on him. He'd been too careful. The door opened. Detective Rosa Delgado walked in. She was carrying a manila folder, a notepad, and a cup of coffee. She sat down across from Caleb without greeting him, arranged her materials on the table, and took a long sip of coffee. Then she just looked at him. Didn't say anything. Just looked. Caleb waited for a moment, then smiled. Detective Delgado, right? We met at the vigil. You were standing in the back. I remember. Great. So, what can I help you with tonight? I've already told you everything I know about Mia, but I'm happy to go over it again if that's useful. Delgado didn't respond immediately. She just kept looking at him with those dark, steady eyes. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Most people would have started fidgeting by now. Most people would have rushed to fill the silence with nervous chatter. But Caleb wasn't most people. He held her gaze calmly, still smiling, waiting her out. You're good, Delgado said finally. Excuse me. The eye contact. The relaxed posture. The easy smile. Most people can't maintain that under pressure. You're very good. Caleb's smile flickered, just slightly, before returning to full wattage. I'm not sure what you mean, detective. I'm just here to help. Delgado opened her folder. Let's start with your alibi for October 14th. You told Agent Kowalski that you were at the school library from approximately 4:30 p.m. until 6 p.m. Is that correct? That's correct. And Mrs. Foster can verify that? She should be able to, yes. I checked out a book around 4:30. Roosevelt and the New Deal. We talked about it briefly. Delgado nodded slowly. We spoke to Mrs. Foster. She remembers you checking out the book. She also remembers you checking out a second book around 6:30. Right. I was there studying in between. For 2 hours. Yes. In the library. Yes. Delgado leaned back in her chair. Here's the thing, Caleb. Mrs. Foster doesn't remember seeing you between those 2 times. She assumed you were there, somewhere in the back. But she didn't actually lay eyes on you for a 2-hour window. Caleb shrugged easily. It's a big library. Lots of corners. I was probably in the reference section. Maybe. Or maybe you weren't there at all. The smile didn't waver. I was there. Can anyone else confirm that? A classmate? Another library patron? I don't know. I was focused on studying. I wasn't really paying attention to who else was around. Delgado made a note in her notepad. Then she pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. Do you recognize this location? Caleb looked at the photo. It showed an abandoned grain silo surrounded by overgrown fields. The same silo where Mia's body had been found. He kept his face neutral. It looks like an old farm building. There are a lot of those around here. This is where Mia Chen's body was discovered. I see. Have you ever been to this location? No. Never driven past it? Never explored it as a kid? Not that I remember. Delgado nodded again. She pulled out another photograph. This one showed a grainy image of a dark-colored Jeep Wrangler on a dirt road. What about this? Do you recognize this vehicle? Caleb looked at the photo. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. It's a Jeep, he said. There are probably hundreds of Jeeps in this county. Dark blue Jeep Wrangler. Same make and model as yours. Coincidence? Maybe. Delgado pulled out a third photograph. This image was captured by a trail camera on private property adjacent to the crime scene. October 14th. 5:47 p.m. Caleb looked at the timestamp. 5:47 p.m. The same time he claimed to be at the library. His smile remained in place, but it was becoming harder to maintain. I don't know what you're trying to suggest, Detective. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm showing you evidence. This vehicle, which matches your vehicle, was photographed near the location where Mia Chen's body was found, at a time when you claim to have been somewhere else entirely. Someone else has a similar Jeep. It happens. Keep watching. Delgado pulled out another photograph. This one showed a figure standing outside the Jeep. A young man. Tall. Athletic build. The image was grainy, but the outline was clear enough. And this person? Do you recognize him? Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It's too blurry to recognize anyone. Our tech team enhanced the footage. 3 frames where the headlights illuminated the driver's face. She slid the final photograph across the table. Enhanced. Brightened. Sharpened. Caleb Weston's face, visible through the windshield of the Jeep. The room went very quiet. For the first time in his life, Caleb Weston didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Delgado watched him process what he was seeing. She watched the micro-expressions flicker across his face. Surprise, calculation, something that might have been fear. Then the mask came back down. Smooth. Controlled. Unreadable. That's not me, Caleb said. It's not. No. It could be anyone. The quality is terrible. Our experts compared this image to your driver's license photo. Same bone structure. Same profile. Same distinctive features. Your experts are wrong. Delgado shrugged. Maybe. That's for a jury to decide. She leaned forward. Here's what I think happened, Caleb. I think you left the library through the back entrance around 4:45. I think you drove your Jeep to a location where you knew Mia Chen would be walking home from her violin lesson. I think you forced her into your vehicle and took her to that silo. Caleb's expression was stone. I think you killed her there. And then I think you drove back to the library, checked out another book to create a second timestamp, and went home to eat pot roast with your parents. You're wrong. I think you've been watching Mia for weeks, following her, learning her schedule, planning exactly how this would happen. This is insane. I think you wrote about it in your journal. The journal we found in your bedroom. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Real fear this time. The journal. He'd forgotten about the journal. Delgado pulled out several photocopied pages. Walks the same route home every day, she read aloud. She doesn't respond to normal social cues. Resistant to charm. I need to teach her that she's not better than me. She looked up at him. The silo is ready. I'm ready. October 14th. 4 days until everything changes. The room was absolutely silent. Caleb's face had gone pale. That's out of context. You're misinterpreting. Am I? It's creative writing. For a project. What project? English class. We were doing character studies. Mrs. Patterson says she didn't assign any character study project this semester. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in his entire life, Caleb Weston was speechless. Delgado let the silence hang. She'd been doing this for 30 years. She knew that silence was often more powerful than questions. She knew that guilty people couldn't stand silence. It ate at them, pressed against them, made them desperate to fill it. Sure enough, Caleb started talking. I want a lawyer. That's your right. I'm not saying anything else until I have a lawyer present. Understood. Delgado stood up and gathered her materials. We'll get you a phone to make that call. She walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, one more thing. Before your lawyer gets here, we're going to need a DNA sample. Cheek swab. Shouldn't take more than a few seconds. Caleb's face went even paler. DNA. Standard procedure. Mia fought back before she died. Scratched her attacker. We found skin cells under her fingernails. She smiled, a cold smile, nothing like the warm ones Caleb used. If you're innocent like you say, you've got nothing to worry about. The DNA will clear you. She opened the door. Sit tight, Caleb. This is going to be a long night. The DNA results came back in 72 hours. Normally, it takes weeks. Sometimes months. Crime labs are backed up, understaffed, overwhelmed with cases. Evidence sits in queues waiting for attention. But this wasn't a normal case. A 15-year-old girl murdered in a small town. A suspect from one of the wealthiest families in the county. Media attention starting to build. The pressure was on. The state crime lab put a rush on it. And when the results came back, they confirmed what Detective Rosa Delgado already knew in her gut. The DNA from under Mia Chen's fingernails was a perfect match to Caleb Weston. Delgado was sitting at her desk when the email came through. She read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't imagining things. Then she printed it out. Then she walked into Chief Harrison's office and placed the paper on his desk without saying a word. Harrison read it. His face went through several expressions: surprise, grim satisfaction, and something that looked almost like sadness. "The Weston kid," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." "You're sure about this? No chance of contamination? No chain of custody issues?" The lab followed every protocol. The evidence is solid. Combined with the trail camera footage and the journal entries, we have more than enough for an arrest. Harrison rubbed his face with both hands. "You know what's going to happen when we do this. The Westons have money. They have connections. They're going to make this ugly. I know. The defense is going to attack everything. your investigation, your methods, your credibility. I know. You ready for that? Delgado thought about Mia Chen. 15 years old. Left to rot in an abandoned silo. I've been ready my whole career. Harrison nodded slowly. All right. Get a warrant. Make the arrest. He paused. And Rosa? Do it at the school. In front of everyone. I want this town to see that justice doesn't care how much money your daddy has. Yes, sir. The next morning was bright and cold. One of those crisp November days where the sky is a perfect, cloudless blue and your breath fogs in the air. The kind of day that feels clean and new, like anything is possible. Caleb Weston woke up at 6:30, same as always. He showered. He styled his hair. He put on his favorite shirt, a light blue button-down that matched his eyes. He looked at himself in the mirror and practiced his smile. The past few days had been stressful. The interrogation had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. But his parents had hired a lawyer, Martin Cross, one of the best defense attorneys in Ohio, and Cross had assured him that everything was going to be fine. They have circumstantial evidence, Cross had said. A grainy photo that could be anyone. Journal entries that could be interpreted multiple ways. Without hard physical evidence linking you to the crime, they can't make a case. Caleb had nodded, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. Cross was right. They had nothing. He was going to be fine. He grabbed his backpack and headed downstairs. His mother had made pancakes, his favorite, a peace offering after the stress of the past week. His father had already left for the hospital, but he'd left a note on the counter. Stay strong, son. This will all blow over soon. Caleb smiled. He ate his pancakes, kissed his mother on the cheek, and drove to school. Cedar Falls High School was buzzing with its usual morning energy. Kids streaming through the front doors. Lockers slamming. Laughter echoing down the hallways. The smell of floor cleaner and cheap body spray and burnt coffee from the teacher's lounge. Caleb walked through the front entrance like he owned the place. Because in his mind, he did. He was still Caleb Weston. Still the golden boy. Sure, there had been whispers since the police brought him in for questioning. Sure, some people looked at him differently now. But most people still smiled when they saw him. Most people still wanted to believe that he was exactly what he appeared to be. And Caleb was happy to let them believe it. He stopped at his locker. Grabbed his books for first period. Made small talk with a girl from his English class who was very obviously flirting with him. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. And then he turned around and saw them. Two uniformed police officers were walking down the hallway. Behind them was Detective Rosa Delgado. They were walking with purpose. Not rushing, but not casual either. Moving through the crowd of students like sharks through a school of fish. And they were looking directly at him. Caleb's stomach dropped. No. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He thought about running. For just a split second, some animal part of his brain screamed at him to bolt, out the back entrance, to his car, anywhere but here. But he didn't run. Because running would be an admission of guilt. Because running would destroy the image he'd spent 17 years building. Because Caleb Weston didn't run from anything. So he stood there by his locker as the officers approached. The hallway had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Phones were coming out. Recording. This was going to be all over social media within minutes. Detective Delgado stopped in front of him. Caleb Weston, she said, her voice calm and clear. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Detective. Caleb forced a smile. What can I do for you? Caleb Weston, you are under arrest for the murder of Mia Chen. The words hit him like a physical blow. Murder. She'd said murder. In front of everyone. You have the right to remain silent, Delgado continued. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The uniformed officers moved forward. One of them took Caleb's arm and pulled it behind his back. The cold metal of handcuffs closed around his wrists. Click, click. The sound echoed through the silent hallway. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you? Caleb's mouth was dry. His mind was racing. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. He was Caleb Weston. He was untouchable. He was. Do you understand these rights? Delgado repeated. Yes, he whispered. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Yes. Louder this time. Almost a snarl. Good. Let's go. They walked him through the hallway, past the lockers, past the trophy cases, past the poster advertising the winter formal that he was supposed to attend with Emma Rodriguez, the homecoming queen. Every step felt like a mile. Every face he passed was frozen in shock. Students he'd known since kindergarten. Teachers who had sung his praises for years. Girls who had giggled when he smiled at them. Boys who had wanted to be his friend. They were all staring. They were all watching the golden boy fall. Someone was crying. He couldn't tell who. Someone else laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief, and was immediately shushed. Phones followed him like glowing rectangular eyes, recording every second, capturing his humiliation for posterity. Caleb kept his face neutral. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Not here. Not now. Not ever. Outside, a police cruiser was waiting. The morning sun was painfully bright. Caleb squinted against it as the officers led him down the front steps of the school. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Parents dropping off kids who had stopped to see what was happening. A local news van that had somehow gotten word of the arrest. A reporter with a microphone rushing toward them. Caleb Weston. Do you have any comment on your arrest? Caleb said nothing. Did you kill Mia Chen? Do you have anything to say to her family? Nothing. The officer put a hand on Caleb's head and guided him into the back of the cruiser. The door slammed shut. Through the window, Caleb could see the crowd growing. More phones. More cameras. More witnesses to his downfall. And standing at the edge of the crowd, almost hidden in the shadow of a large oak tree, he saw a familiar face. Lily Chen. Mia's mother. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She was just standing there, watching, with an expression that Caleb couldn't quite read. Grief, yes. But something else too. Something that looked almost like relief. The cruiser pulled away from the curb. And Caleb Weston, for the first time in his life, understood what it felt like to lose. The news spread like wildfire. Within an hour, it was all anyone could talk about. In Cedar Falls, in the surrounding towns, across the state. Social media exploded with videos of the arrest, hot takes and theories, people who claimed they always knew there was something wrong with that Weston kid. The major news networks picked it up by lunchtime. Small-town golden boy arrested for murder of 15-year-old girl. Teen debate champion charged in brutal killing. The dark side of Cedar Falls. Surgeon's son accused of classmate's murder. Patricia Weston saw the news on her television and collapsed. Dr. Richard Weston left a surgery halfway through and drove home at 90 miles an hour. Martin Cross, the expensive defense attorney, started earning his retainer. And in the county jail, in a holding cell with concrete walls and a metal toilet, Caleb Weston sat on a thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't smiling anymore. But here's the thing about narcissists. Even when they're caught, even when the walls are closing in, even when the evidence is overwhelming and the world is watching their destruction, they still believe they're going to win. Caleb had been knocked down. But in his mind, he wasn't beaten. Not yet. He still had his charm. He still had his intelligence. He still had his family's money and the best defense attorney their money could buy. He would beat this. He would explain away the evidence. He would convince the jury that he was the victim of a rush to judgment, a small-town witch hunt, a tragic misunderstanding. He would walk out of that courtroom a free man, and everyone who had doubted him would feel terrible about it. That was what Caleb believed. That was what Caleb was counting on. He had no idea that a judge named Eleanor Vance had already seen the footage. And she had already decided exactly what kind of monster she was dealing with. The trial of Caleb Weston began on a gray Monday morning in January. 3 months had passed since his arrest. 3 months of pretrial hearings, motions, jury selection, and more media coverage than Cedar Falls had ever seen in its entire history. News vans lined the street outside the county courthouse. Reporters camped out in the cold, clutching coffee cups and microphones, waiting for any scrap of information they could broadcast to a hungry public. Because America was obsessed with this case. A handsome teenager from a wealthy family. A brilliant student with a perfect smile. A murdered girl who just wanted to play violin and help animals. It had everything. Privilege, tragedy, the question of whether justice could truly be blind when the accused had so much money and so many advantages. Legal experts debated on cable news. True crime podcasts released daily episodes analyzing every detail. Social media was a battlefield between people who were convinced of Caleb's guilt and a smaller but vocal group who believed he was being railroaded. And at the center of it all was Caleb himself. Still smiling. Still confident. Still absolutely certain that he was going to walk out of this courtroom a free man. The defense strategy was exactly what Detective Delgado had predicted. Martin Cross was a shark. 62 years old, silver-haired, with a voice like honey and a mind like a steel trap. He'd defended politicians, CEOs, and celebrities. He'd never lost a murder case. Never. His approach was simple but effective. Create doubt. The trail camera footage? Grainy and inconclusive. The figure in the video could be anyone of similar height and build. The vehicle could be any dark-colored Jeep. There were hundreds in the county. The journal entries? Creative writing. Teenage angst. A young man processing complicated emotions through fiction. Taking them literally was a fundamental misunderstanding of how adolescent minds work. The DNA evidence? This was trickier, but Cross had an explanation for this too. Caleb and Mia went to the same school. They'd interacted at a party. Perhaps there had been contact that Caleb didn't remember. A handshake, a brush of hands, something innocent that transferred skin cells. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client is a monster, Cross said in his opening statement. They want you to look at this young man, this honor student, this community volunteer, this beloved son, and see a cold-blooded killer. He paused, letting his words sink in. But what they have is not proof. What they have is coincidence, speculation, and a rush to judgment. What they have is a town desperate to blame someone, anyone, for a terrible tragedy. He pointed at Caleb, who sat at the defense table looking appropriately somber. Caleb Weston is not a monster. He is a 17-year-old boy who has had his life destroyed by circumstantial evidence and prosecutorial overreach. And at the end of this trial, you will see that. You will see the truth. The jury listened. Some of them nodded slightly. And Caleb felt hope bloom in his chest. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Margaret Holloway. She was the opposite of Martin Cross in almost every way. No flash, no drama, no theatrical gestures. She was methodical, precise, relentless. She built cases like an architect builds buildings, brick by brick, foundation first, until the structure was unshakable. Her opening statement was brief. This case is not complicated, she said. A 15-year-old girl is dead. The evidence will show that the defendant stalked her, abducted her, and murdered her. The evidence will show that he planned this crime in detail and then attempted to cover it up. The evidence will show that he lied repeatedly to investigators and established a false alibi to avoid detection. She turned to look directly at Caleb. The defense will try to distract you. They will try to make you feel sorry for the defendant. They will try to create doubt where none exists. She turned back to the jury. Don't let them. Follow the evidence. It will lead you to one inescapable conclusion. Caleb Weston murdered Mia Chan in cold blood. And he deserves to be held accountable. She sat down. The trial began. The first week was focused on establishing the facts of the crime. The medical examiner testified about Mia's injuries. Blunt force trauma to the head. Multiple strikes with a heavy object. Death would not have been instantaneous. She would have been conscious for at least a few minutes after the first blow. The courtroom was silent as Dr. Okonkwo described Mia's final moments. Lily Chen sobbed quietly in the front row. Caleb kept his face neutral, but his leg was bouncing slightly under the table. Detective Delgado testified about the investigation, the discovery of the body, the collection of evidence, the interviews with witnesses. She was calm, professional, unshakable under Cross's aggressive cross-examination. "Isn't it true that you developed tunnel vision in this case?" Cross demanded. "That you focused on my client to the exclusion of other suspects?" "No." "Isn't it true that you had a personal vendetta against my client from the very beginning?" "No." "Isn't it true that you—" "I followed the evidence," Delgado interrupted. "The evidence led to your client. That's not tunnel vision. That's investigation." Cross tried to shake her for another 20 minutes. He couldn't. The second week brought the trail camera footage. Gerald Whitmore testified about finding the footage on his property. He was nervous on the stand. He'd never testified in court before, but his sincerity was obvious. He was just a farmer who had been trying to catch poachers and had stumbled onto something horrific. Then the footage was played for the jury. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. A grainy image of a dirt road. Timestamp glowing in the corner. October 14th, 5:47 p.m. A vehicle appears. Dark-colored. Jeep Wrangler. The Jeep stops near the silo. A figure emerges. Tall. Athletic build. Moving with purpose. The figure walks to the passenger side, opens the door, and drags something out. A body. Limp. Lifeless. Being pulled across the grass toward the abandoned structure. Several jurors looked away. One covered her mouth with her hand. Lily Chen was escorted out of the courtroom, unable to watch anymore. The footage continued. The figure disappearing into the silo. The timestamp advancing. 5:52. 5:55. 6:03. And then, at 6:07, the figure emerging. Alone. Walking back to the Jeep. Getting in. And as the vehicle turned around, the headlights swept across the camera's field of view. The prosecution paused the video. 3 frames. Enhanced. Brightened. The driver's face visible through the windshield. Caleb Weston. Clear as day. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Eleanor Vance banged her gavel. Order. Order in the court. The whispers subsided. But the damage was done. The jury had seen it. The whole world had seen it. Caleb Weston's face, captured in the act of leaving the scene where he had just murdered a 15-year-old girl. Caleb sat frozen at the defense table. He had seen the footage before, of course. His attorneys had shown it to him during trial preparation. They had explained that it was grainy, inconclusive, could be anyone. But seeing it played in open court, on those large monitors, with the whole world watching, it looked bad. It looked really bad. For the first time, a crack appeared in Caleb's confidence. He glanced at Martin Cross, looking for reassurance. Cross's face was carefully neutral. That wasn't a good sign. The third week brought the journal. Page after page of Caleb's handwriting, projected on the courtroom monitors for everyone to see. M. Walks the same route home every day. Resistant to charm. Possibly sees through facade. I need to teach her that she's not better than me. The silo is ready. I'm ready. October 14th. 4 days until everything changes. A handwriting expert confirmed that the entries were written by Caleb. A psychologist testified about the meaning of the words, the obsessive focus, the narcissistic rage, the detailed planning that indicated premeditation. Cross tried to spin it as creative writing. But the dates were too specific. The details were too accurate. The timeline matched perfectly with Mia's disappearance. The jury wasn't buying it. Caleb could see it in their faces. The doubt that Cross had tried to create was evaporating with every piece of evidence. And then came the DNA. The forensic expert was clinical, precise, devastating. We recovered skin cells from beneath the victim's fingernails. These cells were submitted for DNA analysis and compared against the defendant's DNA profile. What were the results? The DNA was a match to the defendant, Caleb Weston. The probability of this being a coincidental match is approximately 1 in 7.8 billion. The number hung in the air. 1 in 7.8 billion. Not 1 in 1,000. Not 1 in 1,000,000. 1 in 7.8 billion. Essentially impossible that it was anyone else. Cross tried to explain it away, incidental contact, cross-contamination, but his explanation sounded weak even to Caleb's ears. The DNA was the nail in the coffin. And everyone in that courtroom knew it. At the end of the third week, Judge Eleanor Vance called a brief recess before closing arguments. Caleb sat in the holding room with his attorneys, his leg bouncing, his fingers tapping against the table. "So," he said, "what do we do now?" Martin Cross looked at him for a long moment. "We give the best closing argument we can. We remind the jury about reasonable doubt. We hope that someone on that panel has enough uncertainty to hang the jury." "And if they don't?" Cross didn't answer. He didn't need to. For the first time in his life, Caleb Weston was starting to understand that he might actually lose. Let me take you back into that courtroom. Closing arguments. The final act. The last chance for both sides to make their case before the jury disappeared into a room to decide Caleb Weston's fate. The gallery was packed. Every seat taken. People standing against the walls. More people outside, watching on screens set up in the courthouse lobby because there wasn't enough room inside. Mia's parents sat in the front row, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Caleb's parents sat on the opposite side. Patricia looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 months. Richard sat rigid, his jaw clenched, staring straight ahead. And at the bench, presiding over all of it, sat Judge Eleanor Vance. 63 years old. Steel-gray hair. Eyes that missed nothing. She had reviewed every piece of evidence in this case. She had watched the trail camera footage multiple times in her chambers. She had read every page of Caleb's journal. And she had already formed her opinion about the defendant. Not that it mattered for the verdict, that was the jury's job. But it would matter very soon. For sentencing. Martin Cross delivered his closing argument first. He was good. Even his critics had to admit that. He walked the jury through every piece of evidence, reframing each one, casting doubt wherever he could. The footage was grainy. The enhancement was unreliable. Experts could disagree about whether the face in those 3 frames was truly identifiable. The journal was teenage angst. Dark thoughts that never translated into action. Everyone has thoughts they're ashamed of. That doesn't make them murderers. The DNA could be explained by incidental contact. Mia and Caleb attended the same school. They had interacted at a party. Skin cells can transfer in countless innocent ways. The prosecution has built a house of cards, Cross said, his voice rising with conviction. It looks impressive from a distance, but when you examine it closely, when you really look at what they have, it falls apart. He pointed at Caleb. This young man's entire future is in your hands. His life is in your hands. And I am asking you, begging you, not to destroy that life based on speculation and circumstantial evidence. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the jury. If you have any doubt at all, you must find him not guilty. That is your duty. That is the foundation of our justice system. And I trust you to uphold it. He sat down. Caleb looked at the jury, trying to read their faces. Some of them seemed moved by Cross's words. Others were harder to read. He allowed himself a small spark of hope. Maybe he could still get out of this. District Attorney Margaret Holloway stood up slowly. She didn't approach the jury box immediately. She just stood there for a moment, gathering herself, letting the silence build. Then she spoke. The defense wants you to believe this is complicated, that the evidence is murky, that there's room for doubt. She shook her head. It's not complicated. The evidence is not murky, and there is no reasonable doubt. She walked toward the large monitor that had been set up in the courtroom. Let me show you exactly what happened on October 14th. She pressed a button. The trail camera footage began to play again. The courtroom went silent. The dirt road. The timestamp. The dark blue Jeep pulling up to the abandoned silo. This is the defendant's vehicle, Holloway said. Same make. Same model. Same color. Registered to his father. The figure emerging from the driver's side. This is the defendant. Same height. Same build. Same physical characteristics. The figure walking to the passenger side. Opening the door. Dragging something out. A body. This is Mia Chen. 15 years old. A girl who played violin. A girl who wanted to be a veterinarian. A girl who had her entire life ahead of her. The footage continued. The figure pulling Mia toward the silo. Disappearing inside. The timestamp advancing. 5:52. 5:55. 6:03. For 16 minutes, Mia Chen was inside that structure with her killer. 16 minutes. I want you to think about that. Think about how long 16 minutes really is. The courtroom was absolutely still. And then the figure emerged at 6:07. Alone. He walked out alone. Because Mia Chen was dead. He had beaten her to death with a piece of concrete. We found it at the scene, covered in her blood and his skin cells, and he left her body there like garbage. Holloway paused the footage. The enhanced image of Caleb's face filled the screen. Clear. Unmistakable. Those ocean blue eyes that had charmed so many people. Now captured in the moment of his greatest crime. The defense says this image is inconclusive. They say it could be anyone. Holloway turned to face Caleb directly. Look at it. Look at that face. And then look at the defendant sitting in this courtroom. Every head in the room turned toward Caleb. Every eye compared the image on the screen to the young man at the defense table. The resemblance was undeniable. That is the same person. You know it. I know it. Everyone in this courtroom knows it. Holloway wasn't finished. She walked back to her table and picked up a stack of papers. Let's talk about the journal. She read several entries aloud. The same entries the jury had heard before, but somehow more damning in the context of closing arguments. I need to teach her that she's not better than me. The silo is ready. I'm ready. October 14th. 4 days until everything changes. The defense calls this creative writing. Teenage angst. Fiction. She set the papers down. Does this sound like fiction to you? Does this sound like a creative writing exercise? She looked at the jury. He wrote down his plan. He wrote down the date. He wrote down the location. And then he executed that plan exactly as he described. She walked closer to the jury box. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was premeditated murder. Planned in detail. Carried out with precision. By a young man who believed he was too smart to get caught. Then Holloway delivered the final blow. Let's talk about DNA. She held up the forensic report. The prosecution's expert testified that the DNA found under Mia Chen's fingernails matches the defendant. 1 in 7.8 billion chance of a coincidental match. She let that number hang in the air. 1 in 7.8 billion. There are only 8 billion people on this planet. That means, statistically, there is no one else on Earth who could have left that DNA under Mia's fingernails. She pointed at Caleb. No one except him. Caleb's mask was cracking. His leg was bouncing harder now. His fingers were gripping the edge of the table. A thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. For the first time, he looked scared. Really scared. The defense says this could be explained by incidental contact. A handshake. A brush of hands at a party. Holloway shook her head. Mia Chen fought back. The medical examiner testified to this. She scratched her attacker. She clawed at him, trying to survive, trying to escape. That's how his DNA ended up under her nails. Not from a handshake. From a fight for her life. Holloway walked back to the center of the courtroom. The defense has tried to create doubt. That's their job. But doubt needs to be reasonable. It needs to be based on logic, on evidence, on something more than wishful thinking. She turned to face the jury one final time. There is no reasonable doubt here. A young man became obsessed with a girl who rejected him. He planned her murder. He carried it out. He tried to cover it up. And he almost got away with it. She paused. Almost. She gestured toward the monitor, where Caleb's face was still frozen on the screen. But a trail camera captured him. His own journal documented his plans. And the victim, brave, 15-year-old Mia Chen, scratched his DNA from his skin as she fought for her life. Her voice dropped lower. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his charm and his family's money would protect him. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. She looked at Caleb. He was wrong. Then she turned back to the jury. Mia Chen deserves justice. Her family deserves justice. This community deserves justice. I am asking you to deliver it. She walked back to her seat. Find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. And then something happened that no one expected. Caleb Weston stood up. Martin Cross reached for his arm, trying to pull him back down, but Caleb shook him off. Your Honor, I want to speak. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Vance banged her gavel. Mr. Weston, sit down. This is not the time. I have a right to speak. I have a right to defend myself. His voice was rising. The calm, charming mask was slipping away. Cross was on his feet now, trying to physically restrain his client. Caleb, stop. Sit down. You're making it worse. But Caleb wasn't listening. He was looking at the jury with wild eyes. You don't understand. None of you understand. She was nobody. She was nothing. And she looked at me like I was the nothing. Like I was beneath her. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I'm Caleb Weston. I'm going to Duke. I'm going to be somebody. And she thought she could just reject me? Ignore me? Like I didn't matter. Cross finally managed to pull Caleb back into his seat. But the damage was done. The jury had seen it. Everyone had seen it. The mask had finally shattered. And underneath was exactly what Detective Delgado had suspected all along. A monster. Judge Vance stared at Caleb for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. But something flickered in her eyes. Something cold. Something that said, I know exactly what you are. She turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you will disregard the defendant's outburst. You will base your verdict solely on the evidence presented during this trial. But they wouldn't disregard it. They couldn't. Because Caleb Weston had just shown them his true face. And it was terrifying. The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 47 minutes. That's it. 1 hour and 47 minutes to decide the fate of Caleb Weston. In legal terms, that's practically nothing. Complex murder cases can take days, sometimes weeks, for a jury to work through. They review evidence. They argue. They take votes and discuss and argue some more. But this jury didn't need that. They had seen the footage. They had read the journal. They had heard the DNA evidence. And they had watched Caleb Weston stand up in open court and reveal exactly who he really was. 1 hour and 47 minutes. That's how long it took for 12 strangers to unanimously agree that Caleb Weston was guilty of murder. The word came down just after 4 p.m. The jury had reached a verdict. News spread through the courthouse like electricity. Reporters scrambled for their seats. Spectators who had stepped out for coffee rushed back in. The bailiffs had to physically prevent people from overcrowding the gallery. Caleb was brought back into the courtroom. He looked different now. The expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair, usually so perfectly styled, was disheveled. Dark circles had appeared under his eyes. He moved like a man walking through water, slow, heavy, reluctant. The confidence was gone. The smile was gone. For the first time in his life, Caleb Weston looked exactly like what he was, a scared teenager who had finally realized that his charm couldn't save him. He sat down at the defense table. Martin Cross leaned over and whispered something to him. Caleb didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead, his face blank, his eyes empty. The jury filed in. 12 faces. 12 ordinary people from Cedar Falls and the surrounding area. Teachers and farmers and accountants and stay-at-home parents. The kind of people Caleb had manipulated his entire life. But not today. Today, they held his fate in their hands. And they weren't smiling. Judge Eleanor Vance looked at the jury foreman, a middle-aged man with a gray beard and kind eyes that had turned hard over the past 3 weeks. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. Please hand the verdict form to the bailiff. The paper was passed from the foreman to the bailiff to the judge. Vance unfolded it slowly, read it, and nodded once. Her expression didn't change. But something shifted in the courtroom. Something in the air. Everyone could feel it. This was the moment. Will the defendant please rise? Caleb stood. His legs were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. Martin Cross stood beside him, one hand on his client's arm. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. In the matter of the state of Ohio versus Caleb Richard Weston, on the charge of murder in the first degree. The foreman's voice was steady, clear. We, the jury, find the defendant. A pause that lasted a lifetime. Guilty. The word detonated in the courtroom like a bomb. Guilty. 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 The gallery exploded. Gasps. Sobs. A few people actually applauded before Judge Vance silenced them with a sharp bang of her gavel. Order. There will be order in this court. But no one was really listening. Mia's mother collapsed into her husband's arms, crying so hard her whole body shook. But these weren't tears of grief. Not only. There was relief in those tears. Vindication. The knowledge that her daughter's killer would face justice. Patricia Weston screamed. A raw, animal sound that cut through the chaos of the courtroom. She tried to push her way toward her son, but the bailiffs held her back. No. No, this isn't right. He's innocent. He's just a boy. He's my boy. Richard Weston sat frozen, his face gray, staring at his son like he was seeing him for the first time. And Caleb? Caleb stood perfectly still. His face was white. His eyes were wide. His mouth hung slightly open, like he was trying to say something but couldn't remember how to form words. He looked like a computer that had crashed. Like his entire operating system had encountered an error it couldn't process. Because in Caleb Weston's world, this wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to win. He always won. He was charming and smart and untouchable and special. How could they find him guilty? How could they not see what he was? How could this be happening? Judge Vance waited for the chaos to subside. It took several minutes. The bailiffs had to escort Patricia Weston out of the courtroom when she refused to stop screaming. A reporter was removed for trying to take photos. 2 spectators got into a shoving match in the back row. Finally, something like order was restored. Vance looked at Caleb, who was still standing, still frozen, still processing the impossible reality of his conviction. Mr. Weston, you have been found guilty of murder in the first degree by a jury of your peers. Sentencing will take place in this courtroom in 2 weeks' time. She paused. Given the severity of the crime and the evidence of premeditation, I am remanding you to custody without bail until sentencing. Martin Cross spoke up. Your Honor, we intend to file an appeal. The defendant's outburst during closing arguments is not grounds for appeal, Mr. Cross. Your client spoke voluntarily, against your advice, and the jury was instructed to disregard it. But Save it for the appellate court. This proceeding is adjourned. She banged her gavel once. Final. Absolute. Done. The bailiffs moved toward Caleb. He watched them approach like a man in a dream. Like none of this was really happening. Like he would wake up any moment in his expensive bed in his expensive house and realize it was all a nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. The handcuffs closed around his wrists for the second time. Click, click. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom. Let's go, Mr. Weston. Caleb didn't resist. He didn't have any fight left. He let them lead him toward the side door, the one that led to the holding cells, the one that led to the county jail, the one that led to the rest of his ruined life. But just before he reached the door, he stopped. He turned around. And he looked at Mia's parents. David and Lily Chen were still sitting in the front row, holding each other. Lily's face was streaked with tears. David's jaw was set, his eyes red but dry. Caleb looked at them. And for just a moment, a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Not remorse. Not guilt. Rage. Pure, concentrated, burning rage. How dare they? How dare they take this from him? How dare they ruin his life? He was Caleb Weston. He was supposed to go to Duke. He was supposed to be somebody. And now, because of them, because of their precious dead daughter, he was going to spend the rest of his life in a cage. The mask was completely gone now. The monster was fully visible. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom saw exactly what Mia Chan had seen in those final terrifying minutes of her life. A predator. A killer. A boy who looked human but felt nothing. The bailiff pulled Caleb through the door. It closed behind him with a heavy thunk. And just like that, Caleb Weston was gone. Not the golden boy anymore. Not the debate champion. Not the surgeon's son. Just inmate number 78432, awaiting sentencing for the murder of a 15-year-old girl who had seen through his mask and paid for it with her life. Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaotic. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. A crowd of locals had gathered, some crying, some cheering, all of them processing the reality of what had just happened. One of their own was a murderer. The golden boy was a monster. Detective Rosa Delgado stood at the edge of the crowd, watching it all with tired eyes. 30 years on the force. Hundreds of cases. But this one had taken something out of her. She thought about Mia Chen. About the violin she would never play again. About the animals she would never save. About the life she would never live. She thought about the journal entries. The cold, calculated planning. The narcissistic rage that had driven a 17-year-old to murder a girl simply because she had rejected him. She thought about Caleb's face just now, when he had looked at Mia's parents. The hatred. The entitlement. The complete absence of remorse. Some people couldn't be fixed. Some people were just broken from the start. And the best you could do, the only thing you could do, was make sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. Delgado took a deep breath. The verdict was in. Justice had been served. But it didn't feel like victory. It never did. 2 weeks later, Caleb Weston was brought back into the courtroom for sentencing. He looked like a different person. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that hung off his frame. He had lost weight. The county jail food was nothing like his mother's pot roast. His hair was longer, unkempt, without access to his expensive styling products. Dark circles had deepened under his eyes. But the biggest change was in his face. The smile was gone. Not just hidden. Gone. Like he had forgotten how to form one. In its place was something harder. Colder. The mask had been stripped away, and what remained was the raw, ugly thing that had always lived underneath. He shuffled into the courtroom in shackles, guided by 2 bailiffs. The gallery was packed again. Same reporters. Same cameras. Same morbid fascination with the downfall of a golden boy. Mia's parents sat in the front row, same as before. Lily Chen looked exhausted but resolute. She had aged years in the past few months. The grief had carved lines into her face that would never go away. David Chen sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders. His expression was unreadable. He had said almost nothing publicly since his daughter's body was found. He let others speak. He just endured. On the other side of the courtroom, Patricia Weston was notably absent. She had suffered a nervous breakdown after the verdict. She was currently in a private psychiatric facility somewhere outside Cleveland, sedated and unreachable. Richard Weston was there, though. He sat alone, stiff and formal in his expensive suit. He hadn't visited his son in jail, hadn't spoken to reporters, hadn't made any public statements. Some people whispered that he was ashamed. Others said he had always known something was wrong with his son and had chosen to ignore it. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Judge Eleanor Vance entered the courtroom. Everyone rose. She took her seat at the bench and surveyed the room with those steel-gray eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. "Please be seated." The rustle of bodies settling into chairs. Silence. Vance looked down at the papers in front of her, then up at Caleb. "Mr. Weston, you have been found guilty of murder in the first degree by a jury of your peers. Before I impose sentence, you have the right to make a statement. Do you wish to address the court?" Martin Cross leaned over and whispered urgently to his client. Whatever he said, Caleb ignored him. He stood up. The chains on his wrists clinked softly. "Yeah," he said. "I have something to say." The courtroom held its breath. Caleb turned to face the gallery. His eyes swept across the reporters, the spectators, the people who had come to watch his destruction. Then his gaze landed on Mia's parents. He stared at them for a long moment. And then he smiled. Not the charming smile from before. Not the calculated performance that had fooled so many people for so many years. This was something else. Something cruel. Something that finally matched what lived inside him. "I'm not sorry," he said. The words dropped like stones into still water. "Everyone wants me to stand up here and cry and apologize and say I've learned my lesson. But I'm not going to do that. Because I'm not sorry." Gasps from the gallery. Martin Cross buried his face in his hands. "She thought she was better than me," Caleb continued, his voice rising. "She looked at me like I was nothing. Like I was garbage. Me. Caleb Weston. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea what I was going to become?" His voice cracked, not with emotion, but with rage. "I was going to be somebody. I was going to change the world. And she was nobody. A nobody who played violin and had stupid dreams about saving animals. And she had the nerve, the absolute nerve, to reject me." He laughed. A cold, hollow sound that made several people in the gallery visibly flinch. She got what she deserved. The courtroom erupted. Shouting. Crying. Someone threw something, a water bottle, that clattered against the defense table. Judge Vance banged her gavel so hard it sounded like a gunshot. "Order. I will have order in this court or I will clear the gallery." It took several minutes for the chaos to subside. Bailiffs removed 2 spectators who refused to calm down. Lily Chen was sobbing into her husband's chest. Through it all, Caleb stood perfectly still, that terrible smile still fixed on his face. He was enjoying this. Even now, even facing a lifetime in prison, he was enjoying the chaos he had created. The attention. The power. It was the only kind of power he had left. Finally, order was restored. Judge Vance looked at Caleb for a long, silent moment. Her face was like granite. "Are you finished, Mr. Weston?" Caleb shrugged. "Sure." "Sit down." He sat. Judge Vance removed her glasses and set them on the bench. She took a deep breath. And then she began to speak. "In my 31 years on the bench, I have sentenced hundreds of criminals. Thieves. Rapists. Murderers. I have looked into the eyes of people who have done terrible things, and I have tried, always, to see some spark of humanity. Some possibility of redemption." She paused. "I see no such spark in you, Mr. Weston." Her voice was calm, measured, but underneath was something harder than steel. You are not a misunderstood young man who made a terrible mistake. You are not a victim of circumstance or mental illness or a troubled upbringing. You had every advantage, every opportunity, every privilege that this society can offer. She leaned forward slightly. And you used those advantages to stalk, terrorize, and murder a 15-year-old girl whose only crime was seeing through your mask. Caleb's smile flickered. I have reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. The journal entries that documented your obsessive stalking. The trail camera footage that captured your crime. The DNA evidence that proved beyond any doubt that you, and only you, killed Mia Chen. She picked up a piece of paper. But more than the evidence, I have observed you, Mr. Weston. I have watched you throughout this trial. I watched you give tearful speeches at vigils and memorials for the girl you murdered. I watched you lie to investigators with perfect composure. I watched you perform remorse while feeling none. She set the paper down. And just now, I watched you stand before this court and declare that your victim got what she deserved. That you are not sorry. That a brilliant, kind, innocent young woman deserved to die because she wounded your ego. Her voice dropped lower. You are a predator, Mr. Weston. A predator wearing the skin of a charming young man. And it is my duty to ensure that you never have the opportunity to hurt anyone ever again. Caleb's smile was gone now. For the first time since his outburst, something like fear flickered in his eyes. Judge Vance continued. The state of Ohio allows for juvenile defendants to be tried as adults in cases of exceptional severity. You were 17 at the time of this crime, old enough to plan a murder, old enough to execute it, old enough to attempt to cover it up. She straightened in her chair. You are therefore old enough to face the full consequences of your actions. She looked directly at Caleb. Caleb Richard Weston, for the crime of murder in the first degree, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The words landed like a hammer. Life. Without parole. No chance of release. No possibility of freedom. Ever. For a moment, Caleb didn't react. He just sat there, frozen, as the reality of the sentence sank in. Life without parole. He was 18 years old. If he lived to be 80, that was 62 more years in a concrete cell. 62 years of institutional food and prison guards, and the same gray walls every single day. No Duke. No career. No future. Nothing. And then something broke inside him. The composure shattered. The control evaporated. And Caleb Weston, the golden boy, the debate champion, the boy who had never lost at anything in his entire life, began to scream. No. No. You can't do this. You can't. I'm Caleb Weston. Do you know who my father is? Do you know who I am? The bailiffs moved toward him. He thrashed against his restraints, his face contorted with rage. This isn't fair. This isn't fair. She was nothing. Nothing. And you're going to lock me up forever because of her. He lunged toward the bench, or tried to. The shackles held him back. The bailiffs grabbed his arms. I'll kill you, he screamed at Judge Vance. I'll kill all of you. You don't understand. You don't understand. They dragged him toward the side door, his screams echoing off the walls of the courtroom. I'm Caleb Weston. I'm Caleb Weston. You can't do this to me. The door slammed shut behind him. His screams faded into the distance. And then, finally, the courtroom was silent. Judge Vance sat very still for a moment. Then she turned to face Mia's parents. Her voice was soft now, gentle, a stark contrast to the steel she had shown moments before. Mr. and Mrs. Chin, no sentence can undo what was done to your daughter. No words can ease your grief. But I want you to know that Mia mattered. Her life mattered. And her killer will spend the rest of his days paying for what he took from her, and from you. Lily Chen nodded, tears streaming down her face. David Chen mouthed two words, "Thank you." Judge Vance nodded back. This court is adjourned. She banged her gavel one final time. And it was over. 1 year later. The leaves were falling again in Cedar Falls. Same as they had the year before, when Mia Chen walked home from her violin lesson for the last time. Same reds and oranges and golds drifting down from the maples, carpeting the sidewalks, crunching under the feet of people going about their ordinary lives. But Cedar Falls wasn't the same town anymore. It never would be. The Mia Chen Memorial Scholarship was announced in the spring. It would provide a full college scholarship every year to a Cedar Falls high school student who demonstrated exceptional kindness, artistic talent, and dedication to community service. The kind of student Mia would have been if she had been given the chance to grow up. The first recipient was a junior named Marcus Webb. You might remember him from the beginning of this story, the freshman who dropped his books on the first day of school. The kid Caleb Weston had helped in one of his many calculated performances of kindness. But Marcus was different. His kindness was real. He had started a peer tutoring program for struggling students. He volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, the same shelter where Mia had dreamed of working someday. He wasn't flashy or popular or charming. He was just good. Genuinely good. When he accepted the scholarship at the spring assembly, he gave a short speech that made half the audience cry. "I didn't know Mia very well," he said. "But I wish I had. From everything I've learned about her, she was the kind of person who made the world better just by being in it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be that kind of person too." Lily Chen was in the audience that day. She was smiling through her tears. The Chen family still lived in Cedar Falls. Some people thought they would move after everything that happened. Leave town. Start fresh somewhere without the constant reminders of what they had lost. But they stayed. "This is where Mia lived," Lily explained in a rare interview with the local newspaper. "This is where she went to school, where she played her violin, where she dreamed about her future. If we leave, it's like we're leaving her behind. And I can't do that. I won't do that." They had turned Mia's bedroom into a kind of shrine. Not in a morbid way. In a beautiful way. Her violin sat in its case on a stand by the window. Her posters of famous composers still hung on the walls. Her journal sat on her desk, closed, private, preserved. Every evening, Lily would sit in the room for a few minutes. Sometimes she would talk to Mia. Tell her about her day. Ask her for advice. Sometimes she would just sit in the silence and remember. David dealt with his grief differently. He threw himself into work. Long hours. Endless projects. Anything to keep his mind occupied, to keep the dark thoughts at bay. But every Tuesday and Thursday evening, he would drive to the high school and sit in the parking lot outside the music wing. The same times Mia used to have her violin lessons. He never went inside. He just sat there, listening to the faint sounds of music drifting through the windows, imagining his daughter among the students. Grief takes many forms. None of them are wrong. Detective Rosa Delgado retired 6 months after the trial. 30 years was enough. She moved to a small house on a lake about 2 hours north of Cedar Falls. She got a dog, a rescue mutt named Copper who followed her everywhere. She started fishing, something she'd always wanted to try but never had time for. But she kept a file on her desk at home. The Mia Chen case. Not because it was unsolved. It was solved. Justice had been served. She kept it because she never wanted to forget. Never wanted to forget Mia's face. Never wanted to forget the monster who had killed her. Never wanted to forget that evil could wear a charming smile and come from a good family and still be evil. Sometimes, when she couldn't sleep, she would sit on her porch with Copper at her feet and think about all the cases she'd worked over the years. All the victims. All the killers. All the families destroyed by violence. And she would think about the trail camera. A $49 device bought to catch poachers. That's what had broken the case. That's what had brought Caleb Weston to justice. Not brilliant detective work. Not a dramatic confession. Just a farmer who wanted to protect his deer and happened to capture a murderer instead. Sometimes justice came from the strangest places. The Weston family fell apart. Patricia never fully recovered from her breakdown. She spent 3 months in the psychiatric facility, then moved to her sister's house in Arizona. She changed her name. deleted her social media, tried to disappear entirely. Some nights, she still woke up screaming. Richard filed for divorce within a year. He kept working, that's what he knew, that's what he was good at. But he stopped going to church, stopped attending community events, stopped pretending that everything was fine. He sold the house on Maple Ridge Drive. He couldn't stand to live there anymore. Couldn't stand to walk past Caleb's bedroom. Couldn't stand the silence where a family used to be. He moved into a small apartment on the other side of Cleveland. He told colleagues he was simplifying his life. The truth was, he had nothing left. His wife was gone. His son was in prison. His reputation was destroyed. He had spent his whole life building a perfect image. The successful surgeon, the pillar of the community, the father of the golden boy. And now everyone knew it was a lie. And Caleb? Let me tell you about Caleb. He was transferred to a maximum security prison 3 hours north of Cedar Falls. A concrete fortress surrounded by razor wire, filled with men who had done terrible things. Men who didn't care about his charming smile. Men who didn't care about his wealthy family. Men who didn't care that he was supposed to go to Duke. In prison, Caleb Weston was nobody. Just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. Just another number in the system. Just another killer among killers. His first year was hard. He tried to use his charm at first. Old habits die hard. He tried to manipulate the guards, to establish himself among the other inmates, to find some way to be special. It didn't work. The guards had seen 1,000 Caleb Westons. Pretty boys with rich parents who thought they were better than everyone else. They weren't impressed. The inmates were even less forgiving. Word had gotten around about what Caleb had done, killing a 15-year-old girl. And in prison, there's a hierarchy. Child killers are at the bottom. Caleb learned to keep his head down. He learned to stay quiet. He learned, for the first time in his life, what it felt like to be powerless. There was no one to perform for anymore. No teachers to charm. No parents to manipulate. No classmates to impress. Just gray walls and fluorescent lights and the endless, crushing monotony of days that blurred into weeks that blurred into months that blurred into years. Sometimes, late at night, Caleb would lie on his thin mattress and think about Mia Chen. Not with remorse. He still wasn't capable of that. But with something like frustration. How had she seen through him so easily? How had a 15-year-old girl spotted what adults had missed for years? What was it about her that had made her immune to his charm? He would never understand. And that, perhaps, was his final punishment. Not the prison sentence. Not the loss of his freedom. But the knowledge that Mia Chen, the nobody, the nothing, the girl who played violin and dreamed of helping animals, had beaten him. She had seen the monster. She had refused to be fooled. And even though he had killed her, she had still won. Her memory lived on in scholarships and memorials and the hearts of everyone who loved her. And Caleb? Caleb would rot in a cell until he died. Forgotten. Alone. Finally seeing exactly what Mia had seen all along. Nothing. I think about this case a lot. About how evil can hide behind a beautiful face. About how charm can be a weapon. About how the people we trust the most can sometimes be the most dangerous. I think about Mia Chen. A girl who saw the truth when no one else did. A girl who refused to smile at a monster just because everyone else was smiling. A girl whose instincts were right, even if they couldn't save her. I think about Detective Delgado. 30 years of experience. A gut feeling she refused to ignore. The determination to see justice done, no matter how powerful the accused. I think about Gerald Whitmore. A farmer with a trail camera. An ordinary man who did an extraordinary thing simply by coming forward with what he found. And I think about the lesson in all of this. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the boy next door. The homecoming king. The kid everyone admires. Sometimes they smile at you, and shake your hand, and make you feel special. And the only defense we have is to trust our instincts. To pay attention when something feels wrong. To listen to that voice in the back of our heads that whispers, "This person is not what they seem." Mia Chen listened to that voice. It didn't save her life, but it helped catch her killer. And in the end, maybe that's the best we can hope for. That the truth comes out. That justice finds a way. That the masks eventually fall. If this story moved you, disturbed you, made you think, then do me a favor. Share it with someone who appreciates a story about justice served. Hit subscribe. And remember, the most dangerous monsters are the ones who smile at you. Until next time, stay safe out there.